by Ukraine. And what seems to be happening, because, information is, correct information is very difficult to get. What seems to be happening is that Russia is gradually taking control of Bakhmut, that is very heavy cost in casualties. But, most of the civilian population has...
So we actually just seem to be losing your audio. We'll just try and tell our team to re-establish that. We also have Russian journalist Tatiana also now joining us. Tatiana, we appreciate you taking out the time and joining us here on CNN News 18. What are the kind of reports that you're picking up? Could you help us understand what really has happened?
Oh, you mean the unmanned, the drones over Kremlin?
Yes, we are understanding the allegation that is being made by Russia as of now that there was a drone attack which was a bid to assassinate Vladimir Putin.
Well, look, I mean, no one in Russia has said that it was actually aimed at assassinating Vladimir Putin, because it would be quite absurd. The blast that happened, I actually heard it for some reason. It was still up at it was in the middle of the night.
Okay.
It was a very loud blast, and we were waiting for a long time for any sort of information and confirmation of what had actually happened. So there were two drones that were apparently aiming, they were flying over the Kremlin, aiming at the Kremlin. However, obviously the president was not in the Kremlin during the night. And it has been confirmed by his press secretary, Dmitry Peskov. He said that, of course, the Russian president was not in the Kremlin at the moment of the attack. And then the Russian military reacted very, in a prompt manner. So both drones were basically annihilated. But it is quite a stunt by the Ukrainian military.
Okay, so you're helping us get some more clarity, Tatiana. You're saying the president wasn't at Kremlin when this entire drone attack happened. You're also saying there was an encounter as far as the Russian forces were concerned. They annihilated these drones as well. Some reactions that we're getting in, we're now understanding that Moscow is vowing for a retaliatory measure. What is the kind of plan, or what is the kind of measures that are being thought out at this point as far as Moscow is concerned?
Well, look, first and foremost, and there has been, again, Dmitry Peskov has said that the president is working out of his residence, which is outside of Moscow. So that's, but that's very obvious for anybody who's, who is somewhat aware of his, his working schedules. In the meantime, the official line is that Russia reserves the right to take retaliatory action in the way it sees fit. So that means that, we're not going to, and this, as a journalist, this, that nobody will ever publish a plan of any retaliatory action before it actually happens. That's for sure. But in the meantime, it's, again, it's more about the kind of the cause and effect that what was Kiev aiming at. This is quite an audacious stunt to pull.
So I just want to understand, Tatiana, then how is Russia and Moscow actually seeing this? What do they think was the original target as far as Ukraine is concerned? And how are they seeing this move by Ukraine?
Well, look, we can't know for sure what was the original target because, again, the two drones that were shot down, they were, I don't believe that they were not shot, I'm sorry. I think they used the radio location systems to bring them down. But in the meantime, this stunt attack that happened during the night, so it's obviously, it's a very weird stunt to pull.
How do you see this impacting the war, Tatiana? It's been 1 year on as well. We already were hearing as far as the counteroffensive by Ukraine is concerned. How do you see this impacting? What is the future as far as this war is concerned?
Well, I think that this is a very, very good show of the intention on Kiev's side, to try and carry out any sort of attack in the center of Moscow, be that day or night. No, that shows more than anything that there's not going to be any sort of, nobody wants to negotiate on the Kiev side. And that means that they want to continue this war. And that means that, I believe that this calls for, for stronger measures on the Russian side.
Yeah. Tatiana, I'll just request you to stay on.
Probably what we're going to see.
Sure. I'll just request you to stay on with us. Former diplomat KP Fabian, in fact, is now back with us. Sir, I'm just looking at the statement that, in fact, has been issued by the Kremlin, where it says its military and secret services, quote-unquote, acted timely to shoot down these drones. Russia reserves the right to take retaliatory measures when and where it sees fit. What do you think is going to be the future as far as this war is concerned now?
I will only make two observations.
Sure.
Only thing is that Ukraine and the West have persistently and consistently demonized Putin, holding him alone as responsible for the war. In my opinion, that is wrong. Secondly, it is unwise on the part of Ukraine to target Putin, because that might prompt Kremlin to retaliate in a big way. So I think there is much, unwisdom in such acts, and let us hope that Ukraine will not repeat such acts of folly.
No, but what do you think the real target was? As I was just asking the Russian journalist who continues to be with us, Tatiana was saying it's no knowledge to everyone that the president is not there at the Kremlin late at night. So what do you think was the intent, or what was the larger messaging that you think that Ukraine wanted to send across?
No, Ukraine wants to send a message whether the intention, the target was Putin or not. Ukraine wants to send a message that it has got the military capability to strike at Kremlin, whether Putin is there or not. And Ukraine has been saying that it will be in a position to retake the Crimea as part of its, under being planned offensive. I personally think all this is, to put it mildly, exaggeration. And what we want, as India has been urging, what we want is a ceasefire and proper negotiations, putting an end to the killing that is going on.
Yeah. I just want to go back to Tatiana. Tatiana, because details are still sketchy and we're still awaiting from an official reaction as far as Ukraine and Kyiv is concerned. What is the local media in Russia reporting as of now?
Well, exactly what we've been talking about. Look, I mean, Russian media are going over the statements made by the president's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. I believe that, everybody here is right now largely concerned, over just what kind of retaliation are we talking about, because this is, again, an obnoxious and very, it's unacceptable for Russian people to begin with. So we're waiting, for any sort of retaliation that we'll know after it's done, obviously. In the meantime, there's still going to be a parade in Moscow on the Red Square on the 9th of May. We're preparing for it. That the 9th of May is the victory in the World War II is a huge celebration here in Russia, being the country that actually turned that war around at the time. So, there's no further speculations because Russian media don't like speculations in such matters.
Okay. Tatiana, we'll just request you to stay on with us because I'm getting some other details also now coming in, even as our colleague Abhishek is also now joining us. Other details that are coming in as part of what the Kremlin spokesperson has said. He, in fact, has confirmed exactly what Tatiana was also telling us, that President Putin was not at the Kremlin at the time of the alleged Ukrainian attack. President Putin was working at his residence. This is the more other details that are coming in as part of the spokesperson from Kremlin is concerned. Abhishek, coming to you, any other details that you're picking up now?
So we know that it has happened somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, and there was no official confirmation regarding that. Probably the Kremlin and the president's office was investigating as to who all could be behind this attack. But apparently, 2 drones were seen loitering above those buildings, and then after some time of that, there were these attacks. And who all have been behind this attack is yet not clear, but apparently the Russian side has been saying that this attack was done on the basis of the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian president, and the target was the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Abhishek, we were just speaking to a lot of experts, and they're saying this possibly could be counterproductive as far as Ukraine is concerned. Any details emerging of what could have been the larger messaging that Ukraine could have been wanting to work with?
So we know that during the month of May, there was this talk about a major offensive that Russia has been planning for weeks and that will be launched. There is another war that is happening very fiercely in the city of Bakhmut, where almost 60% or more than 60% territory has been already captured by the Russian side, but there have been thousands of casualties and the soldiers have died on the both sides, and heavy damage has been inflicted upon both the sides, but still the war is on in that city. But with the latest offensive that was apparently being planned by Russia, it was going to be even bigger or harsher for the Ukrainian side. And there have been preemptive attacks from the Ukrainian side in the last couple of weeks. The last such major was 2 days ago when the Ukrainian side had targeted Russian fuel depot. And after that attack, there was this controversy also where the goddess Kali was shown as a portrayal of this demolition and this cartoon character, which created controversy also. So, this attack that we are currently talking about, this on the life of Russian President Vladimir Putin, could be a message that now Ukraine can reach to the center of the city, center of Moscow, and it can have the ability to target the most protected world leader, one of the most protected world leaders, that is Russian President Vladimir Putin right now. So it was also a kind of expression of the capabilities that Ukraine has attained over the last several months of war, in terms of surveillance, in terms of reconnaissance, and in terms of attacking capability, because the drone that must have loitered around Moscow and in those buildings must have had a capacity to fly for about 1,000 kilometers, then only it could attack Moscow. So if these kind of weapons Ukraine has already gotten from the Western allies, then clearly a signal to Russia that now Ukraine has a better capacity in terms of drone attacks, where Russia has had edge since the war has broken between the two sides.
Yeah, and we're also getting some other videos and images as well, where you can in fact see the exact moment or when that alleged drone attack actually happened. And this is where the Kremlin is saying that its military and secret services then acted timely to shoot down these drones. And Russia is also making it very clear that they do reserve the right to take retaliatory measures when and where it sees fit. Tatiana still continues to be with us. Tatiana, you were mentioning how the 9th May Victory Parade actually is a huge event as far as Russia is concerned. What are you hearing as of now? Will events around that parade go on as planned?
Yes, the parade has been confirmed to go on as planned, again, by Dmitry Peskov. But again, you have to understand that this attack, the attack that happened, I have to disagree with your correspondent, because if you want to show dominance, you do not, whatever you do not attempt a failed attack in the middle of the night. So that was a message. That was a message that technically they can reach Moscow and they can reach the Kremlin. But again, when we,
Tatiana, I apologize for interrupting, but when you say this is a failed attempt and this actually will not work, I'm just going back to when the war had actually started. And this is why I was asking my colleague earlier as well. More than what's happening on the ground, the war usually is also a war of narratives. Even the Russian side, when the war had started, they wanted to bring down prominent structures and cities. And that is why attacking cities like Kyiv and Kherson at that time had become very, very crucial, because if the capital comes down, then you will have a huge messaging being sent that your center has been taken down. Do you not think that Ukraine is using exactly that idea?
Доброго дня. То не можна поки заходити. А де можна зарядити телефон? Ви не підкажете?
And we continue to get more videos and images now coming in of what possibly looks like that moment or when that alleged drone attack happens. We still haven't heard from an official word as far as Ukraine is concerned, but the Kremlin spokesperson has gone on to say that yes, there was a drone attack which Russia is now seeing as an attempted assassination bid of their president Vladimir Putin. Kremlin is also saying its military and secret services acted timely. They, in fact, are also saying that President Putin was not at the Kremlin at the time of this alleged attack. We, in fact, have now Oleksii now joining us, a Ukrainian MP. We appreciate you taking out the time and joining us here. Could you confirm what Russia is claiming? Russia has gone on to allege that there was an assassination bid that was carried out by Ukraine.
No, I can't confirm this. I am a member of the parliament. I am not a military person. Ukraine has all rights to attack any object in Russia because Russia, for 15 months already, are attacking our country. In reality, for more than 9 years, but for more than 1 year, absolutely full-scale invasion happens, and we have all rights, according to international law, to attack any objects on the Russian territory. But I can't tell you about these Russian claims that they're telling that they were attacked on Kremlin. I don't know whether it's a fact or that is Russian propaganda or some fake news. It can be everything.
We're getting multiple reactions, Oleksii, that are coming in as far as the Kremlin is concerned, where they're now seeing this as a potential assassination bid against their president, Vladimir Putin.
So what's the question?
They're seeing this as an assassination bid against their president, and they're also saying they reserve the right as far as retaliatory measure is concerned. Do you think the offensive by Russia is only going to increase now?
I want to repeat you. I can't confirm and also I can't deny. I don't have information. So I can't attack whether it was a real attack or it's a Russian just fake news. Or if attack was the object of attack. They're saying that it was in the night. I don't know that Putin is sitting in Kremlin in the night. It sounds strange. In any way, I would not argue with the fact that me and millions of Ukrainians would be happy to see Putin dead because he's a war criminal. He started the war against our country. He killed tens of thousands of people, so he deserves the death. But that doesn't mean that this attack was real, that what Russia is saying is real. I want to see any confirmations of this. There is no information about this from Ukrainian side. So Russia is very active in propaganda, in spreading fake news. So I don't believe any word that they are saying.
So, Oleksii, if I understand you correctly, are you just saying this is just fodder that is being fed by the Russian side just to try and win in the narrative war?
I am saying to you that if Russia is telling something, that means nothing. They were telling that they're not preparing an attack on Ukraine, then attacked. They were saying, and many, many times they lied. I don't know what had happened this time. Maybe it is inside Russia. Maybe some other group tried to kill Putin. Maybe that was attempt of coup d'etat in Russia. Maybe there was nothing, and it is just some kind of scenery and some I don't know, like movie. They are looking for some pretext or trying to mobilize their people. Everything is possible when we're speaking about Russia. I don't believe any of their words, so I can't tell you what had happened there. What I can tell you is that in any way, and I said this and I want to repeat, that Ukraine, because Russia is killing our people, absolutely unjustified aggression they started, we have the all right to attack any objects in Russia. But that doesn't mean that this exactly attack, was it real or not? But even if it was real, was it organized by Ukraine or not? I don't know. And I don't believe Russians.
Okay, I just want to ask you a couple of other things also. I just want to understand, it's been over 1 year since the war is on. We've been hearing about a counteroffensive as far as Ukraine is concerned. How is Ukraine planning to carry the momentum as far as this war is concerned, considering the fact we don't see it ending anytime soon?
Still part of Ukraine is occupied by Russian forces. Despite last year, Ukraine had a big success in our counteroffensive. We liberated part of our territories, but not all. So definitely we want to liberate all our territories. And we all hope that our counteroffensive will be successful, but we will see how successful it will be. Yeah, that's the war. It's quite hard to predict. In any way, Ukrainian army showed to the whole world that it can be very successful. Russians were many times running from Ukraine, absolutely like cowards. So we hope that this time our counteroffensive will be again successful. Keep fingers crossed.
I'm just looking at some other reports as well. And the reason that I asked you about the counteroffensive is how prepared is Ukraine if this is going to be a new turning point as far as the war is concerned? Because Russia just about 48 hours ago had claimed that 480 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. 200 tons of ammo has been blazed up as well. So is Ukraine prepared in terms of just sheer numbers as far as the counteroffensive is concerned?
Sorry, I didn't hear everything that you asked. If you're asking about numbers, definitely we have casualties. Russia has much bigger casualties than Ukraine have. We don't have official information about how many people from Ukrainian army were killed. Unfortunately, we have killed Ukrainians and thousands of them, both civilians and military people. In any way, we are ready to fight till the end, till the victorious end, because for us this war is existential. Russians try to destroy us as a nation. They're organizing genocide on occupied territories. That is just a colonial war when Russian empire tries to destroy the nation which fights for its independence. And also we're fighting for our sovereignty and for international law. So it means that for us it's to be or not to be. So we will fight till the end.
Alexei, lastly, before I let you go, the Kremlin statement is making it very, very clear that there will be retaliatory measures where it sees fit. Is Ukraine now ready, even if the war is going to get bloody in the months to come?
The war is bloody. Russia is using all force they have to attack and to destroy Ukraine. We are not afraid of Russia and their claims and everything. This war was started by Russia. We are ready to finish this war immediately when Russians will leave our territory. That's all.
Okay, we appreciate you joining us here on CNN News 18. So Ukraine, as of now, denying. They're saying this is just as part of the propaganda war that is being peddled by Russia. Ukraine would like to see more proof. As of now, they do not believe any word that's coming in from Russia. Just to give our viewers a better perspective of what really has happened, there is a big allegation that is being made by Russia where they're saying there was a drone attack, and they're seeing that as an assassination bid against their president, Vladimir Putin. Let me just read out that statement that is coming from the Kremlin once again. They're also saying that once this drone attack happened, which they're seeing as an attempted assassination bid of Putin, the Kremlin's military and secret services acted timely to in fact shoot down these drones. They're also adding, and mincing no words, that Russia reserves the right to take retaliatory measures when and where it sees fit. Also, what is interesting is the confirmation that is once again coming in from the Kremlin, where they're saying that the President Vladimir Putin, in fact, was not at the Kremlin at the time of this alleged Ukrainian attack. He, in fact, was working at his residence. We were just speaking to a member of parliament as far as Ukraine is concerned, and Ukraine has denied Russia's claims of this drone attack as far as Vladimir Putin or even on Kremlin is concerned. This is a big international story that is still developing. We'll continue to get you all the sides and reactions as well. For now, it's a wrap from my side. News continues here on CNN News 18.
All right, we're continuing with that big story that is coming in. Russia accusing Ukraine of attacking the Kremlin with drones overnight in what they are describing is a failed bid to kill President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin said that 2 drones have been used in this attack on Putin's residence in the Kremlin citadel, but have been disabled. These drones were disabled by electronic defenses. Russia, it says, has reserves the right to retaliate, a comment that suggests that Moscow might be using this incident to justify possibly a further escalation to the 14-month-old war with Ukraine, or possibly a targeted strike of some kind. Ben Aris is a Russian journalist who continues to be with us. Let me just first try to understand from you, Ben, the kind of visuals that are coming out of this supposed drone attack. Has anything of this kind happened at the Kremlin ever before, this close to the Kremlin?
Kremlin, but this is not the first time Ukraine has flown drones into Russia. And I think it was maybe 2 months ago, there was actually a volley of 6 or 7 drones, and they got as far as Moscow. But they got shot down in the outside Moscow, in the countryside. They didn't actually make it to the city. They came down near an airfield. To actually strike within Moscow itself is a first, and of course it's very shocking. But like I say, the Russians have been anticipating this. They've already had some attacks, so the Ukrainians have shown that they can fly drones as far as Moscow, and they've been prepared. I mean, the Kremlin has defense guns mounted on the roofs. The Ministry of Defense, which is just up the road from the Kremlin, has been reports, and they've had guns, automatic guns, also on the roofs. And so in that sense, it's not so surprising. I mean, it's a shocking attack. But like the Kremlin said, it seems that they anticipated them coming in, and they got shot down in good time.
Can I try and understand from you? We're still waiting, of course, the Russian authorities giving us more details. But some of the Ukrainian voices are already wondering whether this is just propaganda and whether there was an actual attempt to kill President Putin or just some other kind of attack that they were planning. How do you see this episode escalating the conflict that is already continuing for more than 1 year?
Well, it's impossible to say. I mean, we have unconfirmed reports. The footage that's coming on the Telegram channels showing smoke around the Kremlin, so I think there was an attack. Typically, Kiev, Bankova, the president's administration, doesn't comment on these kind of attacks. When there was a huge bomb on the Kerch bridge that didn't destroy it, but did a lot of damage. Again, Kiev didn't comment on that. There was another bomb that went off in Crimea in an airfield and destroyed several planes and set off an ammunition dump. And again, there was no comment from Bankova. So they tend to be very quiet about this. And I don't think we'll see any kind of comment or confirmation coming from the Kremlin side. There is a possibility that it's partisan action, that the drones, as I say, I mean, Ukraine border is a long way away at the edge of what drones can fly. So it's possible that these drones were smuggled into Russia and launched closer to Moscow.
Okay.
That could have been a special ops operation by the Ukrainians, or it could have been, you know, there's a small group of Russians who are fighting against the Kremlin who have been carrying out small acts of terror and blowing up city government buildings and police stations in Russia. So I think it's going to remain unclear. But as for assassination attempt, I mean, the Kremlin territory is huge and it's never clear where Putin is, and he tends to be inside. The chances of killing Putin with a drone attack on the Kremlin building is very, very low. And the Russians have already said that he wasn't actually in the Kremlin at the time.
Right.
He spends a lot of time at his residence. But the PR victory from this is enormous for the Ukrainians. I mean, to strike to the heart of Russia, to Moscow, to hit the Kremlin itself with a drone.
Can I just request you to just hold on to that thought? I'm going to come back to exactly that. What does this mean to the Ukrainian sides? The entire, you're saying the PR, but, you know, just their boost as far as their fight against Russia is concerned. But I also want to go across to Svetoslav Yuvrash, who's the Ukrainian MP, joining us. Yuvrash, do you have any more details of what the Ukrainian authorities are saying or what has transpired?
The reality is we're fighting a war against the Russians. In the first weeks of the full-scale invasion, they have done everything possible to destroy our leadership. And it's too early to give you all the details on the story and the statements and all that, but it's very clear that as far as fighting a war...
So, the big issue here is, of course, that some sort of an attack has taken place, because there is a visual to suggest that. Exactly who is behind that attack will have to be established more. And what was the intention of that attack also will have to be established. But Yuvrash, if you can still hear me, the allegation coming in from the Kremlin is that this was a bid to assassinate President Putin. I think we've lost him. But that's going to be, Ben, is that going to be something difficult to prove and establish? That this was a bid to kill Putin?
In most general terms, they flew a drone, someone flew a drone against the Kremlin, and that's where Putin works. He sits in that historic building on the river. And in that sense, yes, it is an assassination attempt. As to whether it was going to be effective, like I said, I think it's almost impossible to target Putin personally and actually effectively kill him. So in the general sense, yes, it was an attack on the Kremlin. It was an assassination attempt. But with very little chance of actually working. And I think that's what we've seen. I mean, like I said before, I think the real value of this and the point of doing this is for the PR value in this war, which is Ukraine is desperately trying to keep the story in the headlines because it needs the West's aid. It's afraid of fatigue, that people get tired of this. And you have this spectacular picture of smoke rising over the Kremlin with a hole in the wall because it got hit with the drone is going to be a top story. I mean, it is a top story. Here we are doing it. And that is very important for continuing the war, for continuing supplies to Kiev, for keeping the support on their side. And the Russians are going to react because here's a hit to the heart of Russia. And that's very uncomfortable for them because life in Moscow itself, talking to our correspondents there, is actually extremely normal. Everyone's going about their business, shopping, going to bars are full, the nightclubs are full. And to actually bring the war to Russia's heartland is going to have a psychological shock for the Russians themselves. And that could potentially cause Putin problems because he's managed to shield his own people, the bulk of the population, from the war. And they haven't participated. There's no sense of war in Moscow.
And Ben, interestingly, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think from the Ukrainian voices that we've managed to get so far, they're very clear about this, that, you know, they are fighting a war against Russia. And absolutely everything is on the table. And they are going to try and mount more of these attacks into the heart of Russia because that's how they feel that they need to defend their country. It's not just going to be in Ukraine. They want to bring the war to Russia. You see more of this happening in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're anticipating a spring counteroffensive from the Ukrainian side. And there was someone in the State Department was saying, you know, this is the most effective way of doing negotiations is to do it from a position of strength where the Kremlin's on its back foot. And at the moment, the Kremlin is not on its back foot. I mean, the war is ground down to a war of attrition where they're just shelling each other. But with some spectacular successes, some pressure on the Kremlin, then it seems to me anyway that there's a growing desire to see an end and negotiated solution. But the strategy very clearly is to hit Russia with a hammer blow in this counteroffensive. I mean, NATO Stoltenberg was saying that 98% of the weapons that are promised are now in Ukraine, including 230 tanks. And I've only seen concrete reports for about 30 tanks. So it could well be that they've been sneaking in a lot of extra arms and ammunition material, tanks, what have you, and that we're anticipating a big attack. And that seems very clearly to include hitting Russia on Russian soil. Because so far the
Ben, just hold your thought. Just hold your thought. I'm getting a statement by the Russian Presidential Press Service. They have said, and this is important here, I want to bring in my colleagues Anand Narasimhan and Abhishek Jha as well. Abhishek, we are getting this response from the Russian Presidential Press Service. Moscow will be ready to respond to Kyiv's attempt to carry out a drone attack on the Kremlin whenever and wherever it sees fit. So they're already escalating. They're taking this very, very seriously.
Clearly, the kind of news we were hearing for last couple of weeks about this massive offensive that Russia was preparing to launch against Ukraine, there have been some preemptive strikes against Russian assets, and this one takes it to another level when we see that Russian president's house or his residence complex is being attacked by drones, though in the footage it is clear that before the drone could strike the building, it was put down by some arsenal or the firing by the rockets from the aerial defense system of the Russia. But even the fact remains very questionable whether Ukraine has attained that capability of sending a rocket or an loitering ammunition for as far as about 500 miles, because the Moscow to Kyiv aerial distance is about 500 miles, and the last border connect that Ukraine still holds from there to Moscow, it will be about 400 miles. So clearly, this long endurance capability drones with Ukraine is a sign of worry. Should be a sign of worry for Russia. And
no, but
now
Abhishek,
Russia
interestingly, our Russian guest, the Russian journalist, is suggesting that because the distance is so large, it is quite possible the drones were smuggled into Russia and then launched on the Kremlin. Let me also bring in Anand Narasimhan, who's actually joining us from Goa, the venue of the SCO summit. Anand, once again, it looks like Russia-Ukraine escalations could dominate the SCO, and just the thought process of the global leaders right now.
Well, one also sees, because there is a key one-on-one on the side meeting between the Indian foreign minister and his counterpart, the Russian foreign minister Lavrov, who's expected early Tuesday morning, and that was supposed to be a long conversation. Two big one-on-ones on the sidelines of the SCO is with Russia and with China. Now, is this going to impede or put a question mark on foreign minister Lavrov's coming? We'll have to see, or whether that visit will be on schedule, because Russia has so far said that they treat this as an assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin, and they said that they will choose the time and place to respond, because they're directly blaming the Ukrainians.
Yes.
The Ukrainians so far are being sheepish, and they're saying this could be Russian propaganda. But interestingly, like you said, from Kharkiv to Moscow itself is a 700-kilometer distance. So clearly somebody has sent these kamikaze drones from inside Russian territory towards the Kremlin. There are two drones we are given to understand. Some visuals say that there has been some damage to the Kremlin structure, although President Putin was not present inside Kremlin at that point in time. He was not there. So, but the Russians, they're not going to take this lying down. If you're going to send a drone into Kremlin, Russia is going to come back. And does that mean that this conflict is going to get escalated? What does that mean? Is there going to be some punitive big strike that Russia would give as a counter response? We'd have to see. But more importantly, when will Russia now send the foreign minister Lavrov to Goa for the SCO? That becomes another big question. We're waiting for some confirmation on that, and we are hopeful that that visit remains as scheduled. But what it does is, this does throw, like you said, a new dimension to the conversation point and the focus point here. And the eyes will be on China and Russia come the 4th and 5th of May, because the moment the foreign minister lands in India, the first question is going to be on the Kremlin attack and what is going to be Russia's response and what's going to happen to this conflict with Ukraine. Right. Is there any semblance of peace or possibility of peace now, or is it now like an aar-paar ki ladai? That's what it becomes. What happens with China wanting to play the big global peacemaker? We're trying to negotiate and broker peace, and Xi Jinping even calling Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, will all of that get derailed? That's also another aspect to look at.
I'll come back to you in just a bit, Anand. Sviatoslav Yuvraj, who's the Ukrainian MP, is joining us back. Unfortunately, I think there's still some trouble with his link. Not sure if he can hear me. Yuvraj, you can hear me?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of calls.
Tell us more. What more are you learning? Because Russia's first response is that this is a bid to assassinate President Putin. Whether this attack came close or not is irrelevant. The intention is to attack the Kremlin, and by virtue of that, it's an assassination bid against Putin, and that they will respond at a time and place of their choosing. Yuvraj.
First, Russia is claiming many things all the time, and they are lying about many things all the time. So to me, to take their statements in that fashion is quite an impossibility. There are many actors within Russia who have plenty of motivation to try and take Kremlin as well. It's very hard exactly to pin down the facts at the moment, but I mean, the fact of the matter is this is a clear symbol of the conflict within Russia. And the fact that, again, we are fighting a war with Russia. They, in the first weeks of the full-scale invasion, tried to kill our president and our leadership time and time again. So the fact of the matter is, I mean, it's not surprising that when you start a war that is the largest war in Europe, the Second World War, you have consequences like this. Which actors have actually done this is very unclear. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, this is the consequence of starting the largest war in Europe.
Okay, so you're saying this is part of a war, and then there are obviously no limits to where Ukraine will also look to hit back. But I do want to ask you, Yuvraj, this is going to be an escalation point, right? The Russian-Ukraine war have seen...
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's very unclear about the facts at the moment. It's very hard.
Fair enough. It is unclear what the facts at the moment are, but we are quoting each side. What I want to understand, though, is that with what Russia is saying this attack is and what they plan to do, there will be possibly an escalation in this conflict. Isn't that something that the Ukrainian establishment would be aware of?
I mean, the Russians are killing, murdering, destroying en masse every single day. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's not exactly the escalation that is. There is a full-scale war happening right now, with thousands dying almost daily and millions displaced. So I don't understand the point about escalation. It's as escalated as can be at the moment. So it's not exactly a point of fear of that sort. I mean, we're fighting a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm talking to you the place where Russians were supposed to be in a week, and we beat them back from here. We showed the world the ludicrous nature of their claims about history, about Ukraine, and about their power. So we're happy to do that again, as much as Russia wants.
Can I ask you, how confident are you in Ukraine and Ukraine authorities and defenses feeling of this fight back that you're giving?
We have shown that we can beat the Russians. We beat them around our capital. We beat them in the north of the country. We beat them in the east of the country. We beat them in the south of the country. So, I mean, the point here is that we will continue beating the Russians until they leave us alone, because we are fighting on one thing and one thing only. That is a right for Ukraine to choose what the future of Ukraine is. The Russians are making very imperialistic claims about our country, that we should be a part of their country, which they should take us over. We don't agree with that. We think the nations should decide what their future is. And our nation has decided right now to fight back in whatever the Russians are claiming doing against our country.
Okay, just stay with me, Yuvraj. I want to quickly bring in Ben also, who's a journalist from Russia. Ben, you heard what Yuvraj said. You know, there is no escalation anymore. This is as deep as it gets as far as this war is concerned. What are your thoughts on that? When Russia claims that they're going to hit back or respond to what this alleged assassination bid is, what does that mean?
I mean, my Ukrainian colleague, absolutely right. This is a full-blown war. There is no escalation. Everyone's fighting as hard as they can with everything they've got. In terms of, but I think Peskov, the presidential spokesman's statement that you read, is rather ominous. I mean, one thing that's been noticed about the war is that the Russians haven't attacked Kiev. Well, they have attacked Kiev, but the bombing as such was in the suburbs, and there was rockets have been fired at the city. But they haven't targeted Bankova. Bankova is a street right in the heart next to Maidan, where the president sits. And so we might see them use some of the hypersonic accurate missiles, the ones they've got left, and actually target the president's administration, the building, the equivalent of the Kremlin in Kiev, and or start bombing Kiev with the strategic bombers they have. They have these very sophisticated planes that can fly very high above the defenses and actually bomb the capital. And we actually haven't seen, you know, a systematic attack on the capital. So in terms of escalation, I think that would be the escalation. I mean, that would be the obvious target the Kremlin would go for, is to start hitting historic Kiev, which they've tried to avoid so far. In large parts, other than lobbing missiles at the city from time to time.
Yuvraj,
and that would be significant. I think even the Russians would find that uncomfortable because, you know, it's a 2,000-year-old city. It's beautiful. Everybody knows it. It's a World Heritage Site. And to actually start bombing the capital itself, rather than the suburbs, which people are not so emotionally attached to, would be another great crime by the Russians to do such a thing, unforgivable. To start smashing up historic Kiev. But that is, I think, the obvious response here is you hit our Kremlin, we're going to hit yours.
Yeah. Yuvraj, please just stay with us. Ben Aris too. I've just got an update, and this is coming from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who's saying that Ukrainian troops will soon begin their offensive. He's accusing Russia of escalation. Let me go across to my colleagues Abhishek and Anand also on this. Abhishek, tell us more of what is the first word coming in from Zelensky. Is Zelensky suggesting that Russia is using some sort of a false flag attack to escalate the matters against Ukraine?
So clearly this was expected online, because this is the false, whether this was a false flag attempt or it was just information war, or whether it was actually happened will remain a mystery. But we know that the Ukrainian President Mr. Zelensky is in Finland right now. He's trying to garner as much support from from the neighboring countries and NATO allies. There he has said this, that there will be escalation in war, and the attempt on the President Putin's life is not going to get away very easily, because the Russian side has been now clearly very much is strong in his opinion that now Ukraine has attained or achieved all those ammunition necessary to attack directly Moscow. We were talking about the kind of distance that Moscow still had from the Ukrainian center, and that was kind of strength that Russia was hoping that it will never be attacked. But now when Moscow, in the heart of city, the most protected building, or one of the most protected building in Russia, is under the attack from a Ukrainian drone. Clearly, this could play very big in the domestic audience of Russia as well, how they are going to react, how the Russian government is going to calm their tension, whether there will be panic, or how emboldened the Ukrainian side will be that now they have the capability to hit the center of the Moscow and the President Putin himself.
Yes, it could certainly boost Ukrainian confidence and be a booster to their side, more so for Russia. Anand, my colleague, is also joining us. Anand, as you heard some of our experts and also the Ukrainian MP, there is no escalating this. This is already where, at the highest point, it is a do-or-die fight for both sides, and more so for Ukrainians than for Russia, because their public so far has been shielded from the aftermath of this war. But now it seems that even that could not be, not stay as a possibility anymore.
Well, Russia does not need any reason to escalate. Russia is already the one which decided to annex certain parts of Ukraine to shield its own strategic interests because of NATO's increasing presence closer to its doorstep. And it all started with the annexation of Crimea in 2014. So Russia does not need any reason if it wants to. It is somewhere, it is constructing the attack and calibrating the attacks based on the response that's coming in. Volodymyr Zelensky is actually on record today saying that they're going to increase their counter-offensive. In the past, he has said that they have the capability to even strike Moscow now. That's what he had said, hinted. There were other voices from the Ukrainian establishment which came out and said. Now, whether that was propaganda or that's what we are seeing manifest today, we have to wait and watch. Altogether, they have Ukraine has been very careful in calibrating the overall propaganda too. The information propaganda has made only Putin and his closest experts, his generals, the villains of the piece. They have not largely targeted the Russian people. And they have tried to tell the world, along with the Western propaganda machinery, which has been overactive, that the Russian people are not for this war. And it is only Putin's machinations, and it is Putin who's doing it. That's why the attack at the Kremlin. Now, so far, Ukraine has not even taken claimed ownership. They actually are shielding themselves under plausible deniability, saying, how can we even fly drones that distance? So it has to come from within Russian territory. But we have now accessed, courtesy somebody on social media, a very clear picture of the drone actually making its way, and it's trying to enter the Kremlin compound, where it is shot right at the top, shot down by their defense system right on top of the building. There's no structural damage, but you can see the drone explode and then topple there right on the building structure. President Putin was not there at Kremlin. There's no structural damage that's happened, but the Russians are not going to take this kindly. Anybody who tries to attack Russia or gets close to Mother Russia, you saw the response. Even with the NATO nations coming close to even somewhere like Lithuania, Estonia, or even Finland or Poland and talking to Russia, Ukraine made Putin move in and annex Crimea in 2014. This is stepping into Mother Russia, into Moscow itself. This is going to mean that there will be a calibrated response. We can only hope against hope that there won't be an escalation, but we know it's there in the back of the mind of everybody watching this broadcast that there will be some serious escalation in the days to come. What that means, like Ben just said...
We're getting a reaction from President Zelensky. Let's listen in.
And I believe that this year will be decisive for us, for Europe, for Ukraine, decisive for victory. Thank you, Finland. Thanks, everyone who helps us. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll discuss preparation for the next EU sanctions package against Russian aggression, against Russia for this terror, as well as compliance with existing sanctions, which Russia is constantly trying to evade. All of us should remember that the harder...
Abhishek, I want to come to you. Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, is also with us. Sir, just give me a few minutes. Abhishek, we heard a reaction, which was a press conference with the Finnish counterpart that Zelensky was part of. As you mentioned earlier, he's in Finland. I'm not sure at this stage if he's been informed of what has happened and what Russia is claiming and what his plans are. But this looked like possibly this was before this attack was made public by Russia. What more are you learning from the Ukrainian side, Abhishek?
So far, this Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, one of the rarest outside his country's visit, he has been visiting Finland, and next week he's going to visit Germany also. So far, he's been trying to garner as much political support, military support, and also what steps could be taken by the NATO members and the European Union to dampen the Russian economic spirit and damage the Russian economy as well, because of the multiple round of sanctions. About 10 to 12 round of sanctions have already been applied on the Russian trade and international commerce, including the capping of the Russian oil in the international market. But that hasn't done any major damage to the Russian economy, and this was kind of accepted by the West also. So we'll have to see how much of support and what kind of support Zelensky will gather, and whether he's been reacting to the statement with the knowledge of the attack that has happened on the Kremlin, or he was just not aware of the fact, or the bite was previously
Let's just wait and see. But obviously, as far as this Russian claim is concerned, we are yet to see evidence of that. Whether they're going to release some evidence to say that they know for sure this is a Ukrainian-mounted attack, we'll have to wait and see. Ashok Sajjanhar, our Russian expert and Ukrainian MP who was joining us earlier, very categorically said that, there is no escalating this. This is already as full-blown a war as there can be. But given that this is now entering the other side of the border, this is getting closer to Moscow, putting not just Russian authorities but the Russian public in danger. How do you see this as, panning out? Do you believe Ukrainians will get all the support they've been getting so far to take this to Russia?
You made a very important point, Shivani, and I, for one, would like to see some evidence coming out of the Kremlin, coming out of Russia, to take what Russia is saying on face value. Frankly, at this moment, I do not take it on face value, and I'll tell you the reason why. One, of course, what the Ukrainians themselves have said, 700 kilometers flying through Russian territory without being detected, without being noticed, and reaching right up to Kremlin. I think it's sort of, it is beyond imagination that.
But what if this was mounted from inside Russia?
Yeah, exactly. So it is mounted from inside because, we need also to factor in the fact that Mr. Putin has his own enemies within his own country. And so, there could be some of the disgruntled elements. Let me mention another point, which is even more significant and even more important in my view. You see, Ukraine has been given equipment, weaponry by the West only for defensive purposes.
Right.
Even when HIMARS was given to them, it was given to them with a range of 80 kilometers, not with range of 380 kilometers, so that it could hit within Russia. It is hitting within Russia has been a big no-no as far as all the support from the United States and NATO is concerned.
Okay.
Now, if Ukraine has violated its commitment, has violated its agreement, and gone inside and hit Russia, then you can be certain that it is not going to get the sort of support that it has been getting so far for the last 14 months plus. I'm sure Mr. Zelensky realizes it. So I don't think that, this would be really like shooting himself in the foot, not only as far as the repercussions, the implications in terms of the escalation, as you were talking about from Russia, but also the fact that, after this, whether it is Germany, whether it is France, I'm sure no one will really be willing, as it is, they have been having, some sort of second thoughts, but that they would be willing to support Ukraine in, what President Biden said, as long as it takes. I think there'll be very many question marks because this is really drawing the NATO countries also to a direct confrontation with Russia.
Yeah,
and NATO and the United States has been very clear, Shivani, that they want.
Yeah, but Ashok Sajjanhar, while you're right in what you're saying, there's been a certain no-go area. But if you hear Ukrainian voices, they believe they have the right to go into Russia and into the heart of Russia. And one of their MPs even told us that you know, we want to see Putin dead. So their emotions and their feelings on this are as clear as it gets. And, you know, Zelensky's been pretty critical of the West, even the countries supporting him as well, because he feels that they're not doing enough. They need to do more as far as protecting Ukraine is concerned. And I wonder, the Ukrainian president said that we are going to launch our offensive, we will reply to Russia, Russia is behind escalation. I'm wondering if he said all of this before this attack took place or as it was happening, and whether these are tied or not. It's difficult to say at this stage because we've not got a direct response from him. But the timing of the statement he's making with the Finnish president, Benares, is very crucial. In that statement, he's saying, our troops will start our offensive, we will reply to Russia, and it is Russia that is guilty of escalation. So he has already espoused his, his intention to escalate this fight.
Shivani, you are very right. You make 2 or 3 very important points, and let me sort of, try to respond to them as best as I can. You know, when he's talking about the counteroffensive, it is not only today in Finland that he's talking about the counteroffensive.
Yeah.
He's been talking about the spring counteroffensive for a long time. And, everyone has been waiting as to, when it is going to happen. And the counteroffensive, Shivani, has been that the Ukrainian forces are going to throw out the Russian troops from the areas that they have occupied in Ukraine. They have occupied about 15 to 20% of the Ukrainian territory. You remember that last year in September, October, they had been able to push back the Russian forces in a very significant way in many of the areas, whether it is Kherson, Mariupol, and even down south. So the whole idea has been, and he's been very clear in that, I don't think there's been any doubt about that. He's been very clear that we are going to reoccupy our own land, including Crimea. Of course, people have had question marks as far as that is concerned. The second point that you made about certain elements in Ukraine, meaning just imagine that if there has been this relentless attack on all the cities that have been going on for such a long period, more than 14 months, more than 8 to 9 million people have been displaced. I don't know how many thousands of civilians have been killed. The whole infrastructure has been destroyed. Would you be very surprised if there are voices within Ukraine which say that, we are going to take the fight inside Russia? But
Right.
the plain, simple fact is that they do not have the capacity, and they have, been given, and all these stray voices that are coming out that you are hearing, they do not have the capacity. They do not have the wherewithal.
Okay.
All the wherewithal is with the Ukrainian government, president, establishment, Ministry of Defense, not these people who are outside.
No,
who might
I
be
think they are
venting their
some of
emotions.
them are elected representatives and they are representing the voice of the Ukrainian establishment itself. Anand, whether we like it or not, we can call it escalation or we can't call it escalation. This is as high as it anyways goes. The fundamental reality is that this could change the nature of the offensive from Russia and also the counter-offensive from Ukraine. And the fundamental question now is how much is the West willing to back Ukraine if they want to take the fight into Russia?
Yeah. Now, here is the thing, Shivani, just take a look at the footage that we are putting on air. And I'd request Ashok Sajanar and everybody else to focus on this. The sky is a night sky. It's 4 p.m. in Russia right now. Delhi is 2.5 hours ahead of Russia. So it's still daylight in Delhi and it's still daylight in Russia. It's not a day sky. It's a night sky. So clearly this has happened in the wee hours between yesterday night and today morning or late in the night yesterday. This footage is now coming out now. That means Volodymyr Zelensky is saying that they're going to increase their offensive and their counter-offensive is going to begin. That statement in Finland happens after this attack in Russia has happened. Whether Zelensky knew about it or not, or is there this clause of plausible deniability is another aspect to understand. That were there other agents who were contracted, who were paid, who were decided that you infiltrate into Russia, get close to Kremlin and try and do this attack, daring attack, which is targeted at Putin and at the Kremlin, saying that we can get to Kremlin too. So it's a big psyop. It can be a targeted assassination as the Russians are claiming it, or it can be just another aspect of warfare where they are trying to say, we can get to you. There are those, or to try and show to the world that there are those within Russia who want Putin gone or Putin dead.
Okay,
So
Anand, just hold your thought. I think we are getting the first official response as far as this alleged attack to kill President Putin is concerned. Zelensky's press service is saying Ukraine has no information regarding the attack last night against the Kremlin. So there you have it. The Ukrainians, at least officially in their first response, have said that they've got nothing to do with this and that they have no information regarding the attack. How has this attack even been possible, as the Russians claim from Ukrainian side, is one question. Do they have evidence to prove that this was the Ukrainian handiwork is another question. Can they present that evidence? Because that drone was, of course, blown to smithereens. Are they going to be able to establish that and therefore get that upper hand they need to further their offensive against Ukraine? Unclear right now. But certainly Ukraine is also not one to back off. If we've learned anything in the last 14 months, is that Ukrainians are not going to back off from this fight. And now, Ben Aris, as we get that first response from the Ukrainian press, from the Ukrainian president's press, it's clear that there's going to be a lot of denial. This is going to be a realm of speculation. But this will have some sort of decisive change in the way the two countries react from here on. Let me bring in my colleague Abhishek first up as well. Abhishek, the first Ukrainian statement is out.
And clearly, this statement does not talk about whether Ukraine had any role directly in it, in this drone attack that the Kremlin has been claiming that the Ukrainian side has tried to attempt an assassination bid on the life of President Putin's life. But having said that, there are too many questions that needs to be answered from the Russian side as well. Because if somebody has to have an attack on the Russian president's life, it will not be an attempt at 3 a.m. in the night, because the president is most likely not to be there. Also, they know that the aerial defense system of Russia is not so weak that it will not detect and destroy any moving or loitering ammunition on the top of the Kremlin. So this is clearly not a thing that opposition would like to attempt, because it will just go in vain. But at the same time, the messaging is very clear that Russians are not safe even in the middle of the city, even in the middle of their capital city, Moscow. And this is a stronger message that now Russian citizens, Russian civilians in Moscow, which have so far been watching this whole battle in their TV screens, they also need to worry that now the war has reached to their home ground as well, and they will have to react to that.
Yes, and I think Ben Aris, the journalist joining us from Russia, was suggesting earlier that this could create pressure on Putin. So Ben, I have two quick questions for you. How is Putin going to react after this? And secondly, how much support can the West give to Ukraine if they openly are to be attacking Russia inside its land?
Yeah, well, at the beginning of this conversation, I said that Kiev very rarely takes responsibility. It usually doesn't comment at all, and it's just done the same thing again here. So I think you can discount that statement as just not bringing us any further. It's just officially said it wasn't us. As for the, I think the escalation that you're talking about is going to happen, and what we're going to see. I mean, look, I should highlight here, this was an attack by a drone. And the Ukrainians are making their own drones. They have their own drones. It wasn't an attack with an American-made missile, a British-made missile. Though your colleague made the correct point that the West has been very reluctant to allow Ukraine or give it the equipment so that it can strike within Russia. And what just happened was the Ukrainians hit within Russia to Moscow with their own weapons, drones, very unsophisticated. And I think that's the way it's going to go now, that the escalation we're going to see is that Ukrainians themselves, Zelensky has been very frustrated. He's been asking for all sorts of very powerful weapons, up to and including F-16s, and he hasn't got them. And they're trying to win this war. And I think the Bankova, the president's office in Kiev, is saying, right, we're going to escalate ourselves. We're going to take this fight into Russia, because there have been other attacks, again, against airfields. There was a string of attacks against Russian airfields close to the Ukrainian border. And again, those were all drones, and Ukrainian-made drones. And I think this is where it's going to go. As for Moscow's response, like I said, they haven't made much use of their strategic bombers. They've used them selectively on a few occasions. And if Russia were to escalate it, they were to try and punish this assassination attempt, if you want to put it in those terms, then the obvious target was to become and start hitting the capital city with bombs, which would be a horrific escalation, because the civilian casualties there Kiev is a city of 1.3 million people, and the casualties go from the tens of thousands, to the hundreds of thousands. But we remain to be seen. As I say, I think the counteroffensive the Ukrainians are planning includes attacks into Russia. So I don't think this is going to be the last attack on Moscow.
Yes, but Ben, very quickly, I've got 30 seconds before I slip into a break. Very quickly, I want to understand with you, even if they're doing this on their own and not with West-supplied weapons, how comfortable is the West going to be with this escalation?
Not comfortable at all.
Not comfortable.
I mean, this is the main fear. Stoltenberg, head of NATO, said, my first priority is to avoid World War III.
Yes.
My second priority is to help Ukraine and make sure it doesn't lose. And that's why the West has refused. They've given them HIMARS, but they have 80-kilometer range. But there are some HIMARS that the US have that have 300-400-kilometer range with which you could hit Moscow. And they specifically have not supplied Ukraine with that because of the fear that the defensive weapons so far, the mentality is we're helping to defend Ukraine. If you give them long-range missiles like that, they become offensive. And then the Kremlin could argue that NATO's gone from defending Ukraine to attacking Russia. An attack on Russia is an act of war by NATO, NATO weapons, and then boom, you're in Third World War.
Okay, all right. I unfortunately I have to slip into a very short break, but our live coverage on this this incident that has taken place, whether it's Ukrainian mounted or not, we can't say, but an attack on the Kremlin, certainly some visuals say that. We'll slip into a very short break. I request our guests and experts to stay with us. We'll be back with more updates.
कंफर्ट जोन है वो खराब ना हो, जिससे हमने जो टिकट का वो कर रखा है, पेमेंट दे रखा है जिसका 4500, वो भी हमें वापस नहीं दे रहे ना, वो हमें 7 डेज में देंगे। तो फिर अभी अगर वो देते तो समझ में आता, हम कर भी लेते, बट अभी तो वो भी नहीं दे रहे, वो भी 7 डेज में देंगे और जो डिफरेंस अमाउंट है वो भी 7 डेज में देंगे, तो कोई कैसे जाएगा?
बहुत गलत, बहुत बुरी है, ना रिस्पांस बरोबर है, ना बात कर रहे हैं बरोबर उन लोग, ना कोई काउंटर में बरोबर रिस्पांस है उसका, और ना ही कोई पेमेंट का ऐसे बोल रहे हैं क्यों ना।
My colleague Ridhima Bhatnagar is joining us with more. Very good morning to you, Ridhima. Ridhima, before the rest took them to the NCLT, the CEO has confirmed that they filed for insolvency proceedings. But perhaps an arbitration could have bailed them out of this mess. How do you think this is likely to play out?
Morning, Shilpa. As you rightly pointed out, there are many questions now as to what could have been an easier step to try and get out of this mess, because as of now, no easier way of putting it. It's a complete mess for passengers who are stranded and for the future of the airline as well. Let's just give a sequence of events to our viewers to help them understand what really has happened. Now, yesterday you had the airline informing that they will not be operating for the 3rd and 4th of May, that is 48 hours. They blamed this on Pratt & Whitney, saying because of faulty engines which have been given by Pratt & Whitney, this has resulted in grounding of 50% of their fleet. But what really stumped the industry, Shilpa, was when they announced that they are also filing for voluntary insolvency, which essentially means bankruptcy, which now means there is a question mark as far as the future of the airline is concerned. Now, remember, the airline requires about 103 engines by Pratt & Whitney, and they have about only half of them, which means 50% of the fleet is grounded. Now, the airline is saying that because of this grounding, they've had to pay revenue loss of almost 10,800 crores. But as we pointed out, this has now resulted into a legal battle between Pratt & Whitney and Go First as well. If you look at the statement that's coming from Pratt & Whitney, they in fact have put the blame back on the airline. What the legal saga will look like, that's one part of the story. What we're also now understanding, we heard from some passengers, they are stranded. While the airline has said that they will be giving refunds, there is no clear timeline. The other aspect that I'm also picking up by means of sources is that a lot of cabin crew and people who are working with the airline are also stranded. When this announcement of bankruptcy came, many of them were between their week offs or on layovers. They, in fact, have also now been stranded, some within the country, some overseas. They've been trying to contact the airline, but no response has come. Now, remember, Go First now becomes the first airline after Jet and Kingfisher that is filed for bankruptcy.
Ridhima, how is this expected to impact the flyers? Of course, it's been said that no flights for the next 3 days. But, considering they filed for bankruptcy, I don't think there's going to be any relief for the airline or for flyers after that as well.
Just a small correction, Shilpa. They've actually announced cancellation of operations only for 2 days. But technically, because they've filed for bankruptcy, we do know that it's almost unlikely that the operations will be back. But as per the official announcement, they've said that they will not be operating flights for the 3rd and 4th of May. What is also interesting is the official statement by Go Air is saying that there are technical operations. They're not saying that they don't have any future plan as far as the operation of the airline is concerned. But as you rightly pointed out, this is going to be a mess for the passengers. It is highly problematic because an airline like Go First actually does not have an arrangement of alternatives with other airlines. So when they cancel a ticket for the passenger, they actually are not rebooking them on another airline. They're saying refunds will come, but we don't know when those refunds will come. So essentially, if you were a passenger who was supposed to fly on Go First between the 3rd and the 4th of May, you're now stranded. You will have to shell out a lot more till the time your refund actually comes back.
Ridhima, also, what's the word coming in from the government, the aviation ministry?
We had a reaction that came in from the civil aviation minister yesterday, who called it.
Welcome back. We're tracking the latest after Russia made allegations that Ukraine mounted an assassination bid against President Putin. Now, advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine, Zelensky, is saying regarding drones over the Kremlin, he says everything is predictable. Russia is clearly preparing a large-scale terrorist act. Therefore, they initially detained a large group of alleged saboteurs in Crimea and then demonstrated drones over the Kremlin. So they're saying this could be a false flag attack to pin it on Ukraine. This is the advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine. In fact, he also goes on to say Ukraine conducts an exclusively defensive war and does not attack objects on the territory of Russian Federation. Why? It does not solve any military problem, but it gives the Russian Federation grounds to justify its attacks on civilians. Also adding, we are watching with interest the growth of incidents and excesses taking place in various parts of the Russian Federation. The appearance of unknown drones at energy facilities or on the territory of the Kremlin can only indicate the underground work of local resistance forces. So very interesting comments coming in. I also have a comment from the leader of Russia's Wagner group, who is suggesting that I believe Ukraine's counter-offensive has already started. So this clearly is a mention to the statement Zelensky gave only a short while ago in Finland. But on the advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine's statement, basically saying that Russia is propping this attack up and pinning it on Ukraine so that they can justify their offensives against it. Let me go across to my colleague Siddhant, who's joining us with more. So Siddhant, this is a very important key statement coming in within hours of the Russian allegation.
Well, that's right, Shivani, absolutely. And in fact, this is perhaps for the first time that Kyiv has cleared its position on this entire allegation which has been made by Russians. Now, there are some crucial takeaways from the statement that has come from the office of the advisor to the head of the President of Ukraine. And they allege that the large group of people were allegedly detained by Russia. And this was done to demonstrate drone over Kremlin. Now, Ukraine has alleged that it could be Russia behind it because they want to justify their terrorist act, and it also gives grounds to justify the attacks on civilians. Secondly, Ukraine also says that they are watching the growth of incidents and excesses taking place in various parts of the Russian Federation. The appearance of unknown drones at energy facilities or on the territory of the Kremlin can only indicate the underground work or local resistance forces. So Ukraine has alleged that it could be a work of some of the groups being supported by Russian Federation, or it could be a work of some insiders. They have completely distanced themselves from this, and they also say that this would give grounds to Russia to justify the special military operations.
More attacks and offensive against the civilians of Ukraine. Interestingly, at the end of the statement, it also says drones can be bought at any military dealer. Because the loss of power control over the country by the Putin clan is obvious, Russia is constantly talking about its total control over the air. And in short, something is happening in the Russian Federation, but definitely without Ukrainian drones over the Kremlin. So both sides, you listen to Russian sources, you listen to Ukrainian forces, two very divergent views coming in. Russian sources saying this is clear indication that Ukrainians wanted to escalate. The president made a statement in Finland that our offensive will just start. And here you have Ukrainian sources saying this is clearly false flag being pinned on Ukraine to justify more terror attacks on Ukraine. I'm also joined by another guest joining us. Harsh V. Pant is a professor of international relations, King's College London, vice president for studies at ORF Foundation, and Ben Harris continues to be with us. Harsh V. Pant, can I first take your view on how you look at these allegations of an assassination bid and what this could do to the conflict?
Well, I think certainly we seem to be moving to another stage, an escalatory stage in this conflict. We knew for a while that both sides are preparing for a battlefield offensive. In this, I think the Russians have taken a lead in shaping the narrative. After all, it's also a battle of the narrative. So, and Russia has been losing that narrative for a while because the sympathy largely has been with the Ukrainians because they seem to be fighting a defensive war against the aggression of Russia. So I think by escalating it or by demonstrating that it is escalating to a level where Putin himself is being targeted via assassination, this is certainly an attempt to change the nature of this conversation, to change the nature of how this war is perceived by the rest of the world, and clearly anticipating that a counteroffensive from Ukrainians is around the corner. And as you were mentioning earlier, suggesting that it has already begun. And this is perhaps the first strike in that counteroffensive from the Russian side, interestingly, because I think they would certainly like to shape the perception field before any ground conflict starts.
Right. On the other hand, I think Ukraine is also doing the same. They're suggesting that Russia is planning something big, which is why they have conducted this false flag attack. I am also joined by Anna Tangen on the Chinese perspective, but let me first quickly take our viewers through some breaking updates we are getting. As far as the SCO meeting in India is concerned, Russian embassy sources are telling CNN News18 that there is no change in the plan of the Russian foreign minister regarding his India visit for the SCO foreign ministers meet. That's the latest we're getting. Of course, that meeting, that visit by the Russian foreign minister becomes of very key importance and timing right now in India. Let me also go across to Aina Tangen. How do you see this conflict now escalating? Is the fight going to be within Russia too now? Is Ukraine capable of that? And what could this do to the entire world?
Well, up to this point, if in fact they did launch this attack, Ukraine has been very careful about attacking the main part of Russia, not the parts claimed in Crimea and Donbass, obviously. But if this was an attack by them, then it gives Russia an excuse to escalate. It could very well be a false flag operation as well. Putin wants to go to the next level. There's been a lot of casualties, very little movement on the peace front. And at this juncture, because of the deadlock and money being an issue, as well as popular support, this might very well be. There's such a tremendous amount of disinformation going on all sides. It's sometimes very hard to pick out the truth.
Aina, how would the Chinese be looking at this?
China will not be happy. They have been proposing peace plans. Just last week, Xi called Zelensky. He was hopeful that this was going to result in something. Obviously, it is not. While whether it's true or not, Russia will use this as a reason to escalate, and this is going to put peace further behind. China does not believe that a military victory is going to solve this issue. Russia's too big, and it's just, even if Ukraine took that area, there would be very, very hard feelings by the local, mostly Russian side. It would be very hard for them to hold it. This is just an impossible situation which needs to be dealt with at the negotiating table, not with bullets and guns. And
that's the problem we've been facing, isn't it, Ben? Time for some final comments. you know, there seems to be no end to this war. It's only getting bigger and bigger. More and more countries are getting trapped, if not directly, then indirectly. This is threatening to now, you know, take over all of world politics. But there is no end in sight. That's the problem.
No, the problem, it's escalating slowly. I mean, if you remember in the beginning, everyone held back and there was a whole debate about whether the Americans were going to let the Ukrainians use Javelin missiles. And then we've built up now to the point where we're sending 400 Leopard 2 tanks, the most sophisticated tanks in the world, or at least in Europe. I just looked up, I should remind everyone, this is actually the second significant drone strike against Russia. In March, we reported there was a wave of drones that flew into Russia, and one came down in a town called Gestapo, just about 100 kilometers outside Moscow. And that was a small Ukrainian-built model that had a range of up to 800 kilometers. So the capability has been there, and the possibility to fly them from the Ukrainian border all the way into Moscow has been there. And we've just seen them actually use that capability successfully, in so much as it actually hit a building in Moscow. And I think going forward, I think this is going to be the escalation we're going to see on the Ukrainian side. Their counteroffensive could include a wave of regular drone attacks against Russian cities within that 800-kilometer radius that they have. And that will enrage the Russians who, I don't know where they can go from this. I mean, the bombers, as I said, I think is the only thing they haven't used a lot of that they could use now.
Harsh, I want to come to you as well. Russia is too big to fail. Ukraine has too much support and the West is not going to allow it to fall. So what happens? Can there be a solution to this conflict?
I think in conflicts like this or in any war, negotiations only happen when the battlefield realities flip one way or another. And I don't think we have seen any movement on the battlefront, with both sides expecting to change that in the near term. And I think that that optimism perhaps falls, but optimism on the battlefield, that with Ukraine feeling that they now have enough reserves to launch this offensive, counteroffensive, and with Russians believing, as you say, that they are too big to fail or that they can hold on to the ground. I think this is a classic case where both sides are at a stalemate, which is not leading to any negotiating effort. And as we were discussing, there have been some pointers in that regard, but we have not seen any attempt by external players to bring the two sides together as well. So both Western countries are continuing to support Ukraine, and countries like China continuing to present plans which have very little likelihood of coming to fruition anytime soon.
No, but could the West's view change? Could they now feel that, this has just gone on for too long and it is threatening to become much bigger and we've got to get to the negotiating table? Could it happen?
I think it can happen. I think we have seen some of that view being expressed, for example, during Emmanuel Macron's visit to Europe. But I don't think there is, again, a broad enough consensus in that regard, because you have Eastern Europeans also in Europe who are driving this conversation. And they are leading this conversation at the moment, and they are relatively more aware of the risks that Russia poses to them if Ukraine continues to be in this position. So I think that vision both within Europe and within the transatlantic alliance, I think, is part of the problem as well.
All right, we don't really know exactly what happens from here on, but is this now really looking like a World War III is the big question on those who are not on either sides, especially for, let's say, Indians concerned in this war as we've been witnessing. That's all from me, but updates on this conflict and the latest allegation coming in from Russia continue.
You're watching News Epicenter with me, Maria Shakil. Our top focus is the big claim coming in from the Putin regime, which alleges that Kremlin was targeted by a Ukrainian drone in a bid to assassinate Vladimir Putin. The Russian government has released visuals of the alleged drone strike on the Kremlin, claiming Ukrainian forces have hatched an assassination plot to execute the Russian president. Remember, this comes ahead of Ukraine's counter-offensive in a bid to reclaim territories under Russian control, as the Russian war machine
faces logistical issues, including shortage of food, arms, medicines, and of course, the morale is also low. Putin is also facing pressure in Moscow as the war has dragged on for over 400 days and the West continues to supply arm and ammunition to the Ukrainian forces. So far there has been no reaction from the Ukrainian government and any third-party attempt for a ceasefire has failed. But how should we see this latest claim from Russia? Is Putin settling the stage for an all-out offensive against Ukraine to end the war once and for all? And I'm going to go straight to London, where Sanjay Suri is joining me live. Sanjay, who in Moscow is making this allegation?
Well, this Moscow allegation seems to have come from Dmitry Peskov. He is the Kremlin spokesperson. He's been the spokesperson for a long time now, and he has been the one who has made this statement. But we have no independent verification of this at all. We do know that the claims from Kremlin are not always very credible. There is no evidence presented of any damage. There is a claim that there were 2 Ukrainian drones that were intercepted electronically and neutralized. There is no evidence presented where they were shot down, how they were neutralized, and over what place. Now, without this kind of a detail to substantiate the allegations, these allegations do need to be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt, shovels of salt really. And if the Ukrainian side claims, as they do, that this is a justification being made for renewed attacks on Ukrainian targets, that again is something that we need to question, because certainly Russia does not need excuses. For a year and more it has been attacking civilian targets in Ukraine day in, day out, and it's killed tens of thousands of people. It does not need an excuse to justify that it will now launch another attack. So it seems to be, if going by the statements from both sides so far, Ukraine is suggesting that there are local subversives at work, which does mean that either there are people who are disaffected with the Russian state, or it could have been those that Ukraine has placed there, perhaps indirectly. In a war, this kind of thing can only be expected. We do really not know for sure yet who is behind this, but as of now, not the claim of either side appears totally credible.
Okay, so we really do not know from where this news emerged, but do we know the immediate, the first-hand source, in the sense that which newspaper, which website put it out first, and the authenticity, can we verify those visuals that have been put out by Kremlin of drone attack?
You know, the fact is that Moscow is a rather opaque place. Kremlin is opaque. We have no transparency. There are no independent journalists around who can verify these claims, or who can offer evidence that we know that will be convincing, because it may be critical of the state if it needs to be. We just don't have an open information system within Russia, and we keep hitting this opacity all the time. We do know that there is a claim that has been made. It could be an entirely fictitious claim to justify another renewed assault on Ukraine, on Zelensky himself, who knows? Or it could be that there was some sort of attack that was carried out by local subversives. The Russians claim it was a Ukrainian attack. The Ukrainians deny it. This is not an area where we can expect a great deal of transparency. Certainly, if there are operatives operating within Russia with support, or at least some sort of encouragement, indirect support perhaps from Ukraine, Ukraine is not going to announce it. And if the Russian claim is something that can be questioned, they're not going to admit that either. We do know that some facts are beyond dispute other than this, which is that a lot of targets within Russia and within the areas that are occupied by Russia have been hit again and again in recent days. Only this morning, an oil depot was blown up in Crimea. Last week, we know that in Sevastopol, a depot was blown up. A train was attacked 2 days back, and a train has been attacked yet again derailed. Now, these attacks are coming thick and fast, one after the other. They're aimed at Russia and Russian forces. They are attacks that, of course, would make sense for Ukraine to carry out. No one has claimed this, but this is happening for a long time now. We've had Russia striking within Ukraine.
Okay.
Now we are seeing targets within Russia being struck again and again.
All right, Sanjay, really appreciate your time for that quick update. Thank you so much. Let me bring in my guests. Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti is former Secretary of Ministry of External Affairs. We have Nandan Krishnan, Fellow of ORF. Ruslan Botnik is Director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics, joining me from Kyiv. And Oleksiy is Ukrainian MP. I'm going to begin with you, Ambassador Chakravarti. The question is, would you agree with what Kyiv is saying at the moment, that Russia is preparing for a full-scale war?
Well, they have been saying that for quite some time. But so this is basically what we are hearing today is the gray zone warfare, mainly by drones. So it seems to be a lot of drones are being used. The oil tank in Crimea was hit by a drone. These are armed drones with explosives which can hit these things and ignite them. The Kremlin thing may also be like that. Kyiv might deny it, but somebody is doing it. So it could be either their operatives who are agents, etc., who are doing it. And so this is basically adding more fuel to the fire, because now Russia is, I am convinced that Russia might do a revenge attack of some sort. There's also talk of that they'll mount a huge offensive. But then, you can say all these things, but what are the objectives of the war? I mean, what does Russia want to achieve? Is it going to now go and capture Odessa and cut off the sea front fully, the Black Sea front for Ukraine? Already it has built is capturing territory so as to build a land corridor to Crimea. So what are the objectives? Or are they completely, the other option for Russia is that do they want to completely overrun Ukraine and occupy it?
Yes.
So it's not very clear at the moment as to exactly what they want to do. But these attacks clearly show that it's the gray zone warfare, information warfare, that the warfare is continuing and is going to continue like this for quite some time till both sides
on our television screens, Ambassador, just hold on to your thoughts. On our television screens is the new footage from another angle of this alleged drone strike on Kremlin. This has been released again by sources in Moscow who are claiming that there has been an attempt to assassinate President Vladimir Putin. Russia, remember, is claiming that it shot down 2 drones which were used in this alleged attack. It is saying that Russia, of course, reserves the right to retaliate. Remember, this is almost being seen as an attempt now by Russia to further escalate this 14-month-old war with Ukraine. Ruslan is joining me live from Kyiv. Ruslan, 2 unmanned vehicles were aimed at the Kremlin. This is the Kremlin statement. The devices were put out of action. How is this statement to be read?
Right now we have a new air alarm, and I'm looking about the sky with some kind of scary. So sorry if I'll stop disappearing some moment. It looks like we are staying before the new wave of escalation of this war. Russia is going on to continue this war, but this war can be much more dangerous for all the world if we are talking about the using of nuclear weapon, or if we are talking about the assassination attack of the leadership of the countries. I'll try to remind you that ex-Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Bennett, said that in the first weeks of the war, Mr. Putin said him that he is not going to kill Zelensky, and this is the reason why there were no any assassination attack with Zelensky during all the war. even taking account that President of Ukraine was many times very close to the battlefield line. And it looks like now that this red line, this communication line, future communication line is broken, and this attack to Kremlin leads to broken this this balance, and Russia.
Ruslan, why do you think Kremlin will be putting out these unverified videos, which are of course circulating on Russian social media, including the channel of the military news outlet? You know, what purpose does it serve them, if not, you know, some kind of a potential revenge attack? It reserves the right of escalation or reserves the right to retaliate, is the statement that has come in.
It's a very good question. I think Kremlin have to done it because a lot of people have this video. Not only Kremlin, but there are too many video cameras around, and I think if it is Ukrainian attack, Ukraine also has this video, and Kremlin trying to manage this situation in informational sphere and to publish it themselves.
Yes, so we really do not know when did this alleged drone attack happened. We really do not have the timeline, whether it happened in the last 24 hours or before that, Nandan. There are several unanswered questions. These are unverified videos, but we have to go with what the Kremlin is saying. I mean, there is no way this can be verified. Or do you think there has to be an intelligence, and who will supply this intelligence to prove this claim?
You're absolutely right, but we have no any verification, clear verification. But we now are in very significant moment. We are in the moment of starting or final preparation of Ukrainian counteroffensive operation.
Okay.
And it's all this situation should be like a switcher of this political balance in before this counteroffensive operation. Okay. It should make a reason for Russia to use any weapon against Ukraine, any weapon against Ukrainian leadership or allies of Ukraine abroad.
Okay, okay. Nandan, Unikrishnan, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, one is, I think it's credible to say that some kind of attack has taken place, because you have official Russian channels like RT, which have shown the footage, and they would not do that unless something had actually taken place. That is point number one. Point number two is that clearly there will be an investigation, and that investigation will then, we will get to know what the Russians think this attack source is. This is not the first attack on Moscow. This is probably the second or third. And there have been attacks on the Engels Air Base also with drones. Engels Air Base is important because it hosts nuclear weapons, which are part of the strategic arsenal of Russia. And none of these attacks have been acknowledged by anybody. And it is assumed, obviously, that this has been performed by Ukrainians or their operatives, but official acknowledgement has been missing. So, you know, the jury is out, as it were. But it's quite clear that, like on the Kerch attack, the only beneficiaries would be the Ukrainians out of this. That is point number one. Point number two.
So, Mr. Unikrishnan, you're actually saying that it will be Ukrainians who will be benefiting out of this?
Of course. I mean, they need something. That's what I was coming to. My second point is they have a counteroffensive to launch. I have a suspicion it may not be much of a counteroffensive. And so this gives them a little bit more time to think about what they want to do and how they want to do it. Because
isn't Ukraine at the receiving end here in this war? It's been 14 months and counting.
Yeah, so?
Of course, they have been supplied with arms and ammunition by other allies in the European world, but the larger question is also that they have suffered attack on their civilians. I mean, the entire country has been destroyed by the Russians.
No, so what happens in a war otherwise? Have you seen a civilized war anywhere? Do you realize that even by UN figures, less civilians have died in Ukraine than Americans killed in Iraq? So, let's not sort of get carried away here.
Okay.
The point is there is a war. The Russians may have been right or wrong in launching it. That is for us to make a judgment
Okay.
on our sort of framework of value system. Whether they're right or wrong, that is for us to decide. But at this point of time, there is a war. The Russians have particular goals. The Ukrainians have particular goals. And the Ukrainians have a very formidable alliance behind them who is supplying them with the latest weaponry. And so you're going to have a war. And it doesn't look like either side is ready to recognize.
And it's an ongoing war, a war which has been continuing for 14 months. Let me go straight to
It may continue for 14 months more.
Okay.
The point I'm trying to make is neither side, neither the Americans nor the Russians are willing to consider sitting down at the negotiation table.
Yes.
So, this will continue till that moment occurs. In any war, for negotiations to begin, you will have to reach a particular situation on the ground.
And which is that situation?
That situation has obviously not been obtained at this point of time.
Yes. Okay.
I am not ready to pass value judgments on whether, somebody is being more brutal or somebody is being less brutal. The point is that civilians are always a collateral damage in any war.
Okay, let me bring in the Ukrainian MP, Alexei, who's joining me from Kyiv. How is Ukraine viewing this allegation that is coming in from the Russian Federation that their president, there was an attempt to assassinate the Russian president?
First of all, I would like to comment very cynical comment of another guest in your life who said civilians, it's okay, it's just collateral damage. So if it would be Indians, would you say the same? So just normal and it's collateral, okay? It just killed women and children, and Russia deliberately attacks civilian areas, residential buildings. Like several days ago, they attacked in Uman in the central Ukraine, many hundreds kilometers from a front line, residential building, killing 23 people, including 5 children. You want to call these people collateral damage? Do you have any values? Do you have any dignity? I am absolutely shocked with such comments, and they are awful. Speaking about who is more brutal or less brutal, the question is who started the war? The war was started by Russian invasion to Ukraine. Never ever any Ukrainian soldier crossed Russian border. Never. It never happened. But Russia attacked our country, killing our women and children far from frontline. So speaking about the last incident in Moscow, first of all, there is already a comment from press secretary of Ukrainian president that Ukraine is not involved in this accident. So it was not a Ukrainian attack. That is official command. But what I want to add to this command, that Ukraine, according to international law, has all the right to attack any objects in Russian Federation, absolutely any, because we are in the self-defense according to United Nations Charter. Okay. Because we are defending our territory.
Alexei, there is a statement that has been released by Russia, and I want your reaction on this. Russia has now released a statement, and they are saying Russia reserves the right to take countermeasures wherever and whenever it deems appropriate. So it's becoming clear that they are preparing perhaps for an escalation of a war that has been continuing for over 400 days.
The war continues for more than 9 years, but big full-scale invasion, yes, for more than 400 days. They are attacking Ukraine all these 14 months plus throughout all our territory with all they have. So we are absolutely, all these talkings about that they will make some countermeasures. What countermeasures? They started the war. They're using everything against Ukraine. They try to wipe out our nation from their planet. That is a colonial war from empire, which is a crazy empire, Russian empire. And they are committing genocide of Ukrainians. We're not afraid of any of their retaliations. We don't, sorry, I don't want, but we don't give a shit about their retaliations. because they started this war. We will fight till the end. The end will be victorious for us because we are fighting for our existence, and what they are fighting for,
Alexei,
nobody knows.
The question is also if Ukraine thinks that Russia is the aggressor. There are several countries that think the same, but the larger question is of what is the end game here if Russia is looking at escalation further? I mean, they have made this charge that there has been an assassination bid on their president.
Not several countries think like this, but majority of United Nations thinks like this. In the votings in United Nations, I think it was 130 or 140 nations which supported and voted that Russia is aggressor. Again, more than 100 nations, not just several nations, more than 100 nations, because it's clear for everybody that Russia is aggressor. Speaking about their president, he is a war criminal. He should be killed. Better definitely that he should be executed as a war criminal. That is much better option. But in any way, as the person who started the war, he should be ready for any development of the situation.
But
by the way, one of the possible
Alexei, isn't this provocation then? Isn't this provocation then? Yes, you are making this charge that he is a war criminal, but you know, to say that he should be killed is a provocation for which Russia will react, even as Kyiv prepares for a counter response.
He is war criminal. It is said by International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court issued a warrant on arrest of Putin because he is connected and he organized deportation, forceful deportation, kidnapping of Ukrainian children. So it's not me who said that he is war criminal. Yes. That is said by International Criminal Court.
Okay, and Russian media, Alexei, is saying that the bombers and jets are on standby. Kyiv is also preparing for counters, and some breaking news that is coming in, and it's on our television screens, that air raid alert in Kyiv as Russia prepares counters. You are in Kyiv. What is the mood like on ground?
I'm in Kiev. Just minutes ago, air raid signal was stopped, and now there is no air raid signal. But Russia attacked Kiev many times during this war. Many times. So can Russia again attack Kiev? Yes, they can. They attacked Kiev this night. This night, Kiev was attacked by Iranian drones, by Russians. So that is happening all the time. So we will defend the capital. We will defend other cities of our country. We're doing it every day better and better. We have more and more air defense. That's all. By the way, it's very interesting. Russia was telling for so long that they have very serious and strong air defense. So I am interested. But what is their air defense if they can't protect even a small part of Moscow, which is the Kremlin? Very interesting.
And Russian bombers and jets are on standby. Clearly, it looks like that this war, the 14-month-old war, is all set for massive escalation. What will Ukraine do for protecting its citizens? Because the civilians have been the casualty here. And in several parts, it's a direct, civilian areas are being targeted by the Russians.
Yeah, they're doing it all the time. Ukraine is defending our citizens in the best way we can. With the help of our allies, we are receiving weaponry. We're using this weaponry. We're using this weaponry to defend our people. But the best way to defend our people is to win the war, and that is the best option for everybody.
Let me bring in Nandan Unnikrishnan as well. Nandan Unnikrishnan, it's only escalating as was being spoken by one and all that that bombers and jets are now on standby is what the Russian media is claiming. So who intervenes to really ensure that the temperatures come down?
Well, at this point of time, I don't think any temperatures are likely to come down. And I agree with the Ukrainian member of parliament that Ukraine has the right to attack Russia wherever. After all, Ukraine is fighting for its territory. There is no question. And I understand he was upset with my remark about collateral damage, but he must see it in a broader context that I was saying that in any war, whether it was the US in Afghanistan, US in Iraq, those are recent examples, or what happens in Syria today, it is the civilians who suffer. In every war, it is civilians since the medieval times.
Yes,
so I was making
but
a
Mr.
general remark
Unnikrishnan,
about it.
you know, this is such a
The second
prolonged
point-
war. This is such a
The
prolonged
second
war.
point, the second point I'm trying to make here is that we are judging wars by 21st century standards, where we are used to things that take place according to television visuals, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe 30 days at most. This is going to be a prolonged war. Please don't forget.
Yes, that's why my question is, because this is such a prolonged war and Russia is also far from victory, is Russian armed forces a great war machine then? That's a question now being asked.
Well, I would suggest that you look at it slightly differently. I'm not trying to justify anybody here. But the only point I'm making is, if Russia is facing such a superior force, which NATO is supposed to have in terms of arms, and they are with the Ukrainians, why is it that Russia holds territory and not Ukraine? The point is, we don't know. In the fog of war, information is very, very vague. We don't know how the Russian equipment is performing. We don't know how the Western equipment is performing. There is no criteria to make a judgment that Western artillery systems are doing well or that Russians are doing better. I mean, we don't have that information.
Okay.
So I think we should not rush to judgment. We should wait and watch.
So, Alexei, here is an expert who is suggesting, yes, wait and watch. But the larger question is, this is the fog of war. I mean, we often see that information is the first casualty in war.
Well, in some cases, willingly.
Yes,
Alexei. That was a question to me?
Yes, please go ahead.
First of all, another your guest, he mentioned the war of U.S. in Afghanistan and Iraq. But sorry, why you're mentioning these examples? Ukraine never attacked any nation. Yes, definitely, in all wars, not only military people are killed, but civilians. That's why the war is awful. And Ukraine never ever started any war. We are the only nation in human history which voluntarily gave up nuclear weaponry in 1994 under the guarantees of Russian Federation that they will never attack us. And just look how cynical they are, that they exactly what they did, they attacked us. But we gave up our nuclear weaponry. So we are the most peaceful nation in the human history. We never attacked anybody. So it's so bad that Ukraine is attacked today. And there is a side which is responsible for this. The side which started the war, it's Russian Federation. So I think that's very important to tell about this. Sorry, what another question do you have to
Yes, because there is an update that is coming in that the head of Zelensky's office has alleged and has perhaps hinted at Ukraine's involvement in the drone attack on the Kremlin 5 hours before the UAV explosion over the Kremlin Senate Palace. Andrei Yermak posted a post on his Telegram channel with a rocket and later with emoji lights.
You're kidding. So we will now discuss emojis in the live?
I mean, that's what the news, one of the news websites are suggesting.
Okay, once again, we have official position of press secretary of Ukrainian president commented it officially, not with emojis and other funny stuff. It's not funny. It's a very serious war which happens against our country.
Yes, that's right.
We will defend ourselves with all. Andrei Yermak, so what? So you want me to comment his emojis? I'm not commenting emojis.
I understand it. I understand it, Honorable MP. I understand it, but I'm just trying to look, I'm looking at the news because, of course, this is a developing story. Now, the Russian parliament speaker has demanded that Kiev regime be destroyed after the drone attack on the Kremlin. I mean, these are strong statements.
We are hearing, these strong statements we're hearing from the beginning. I just want to remind you, when everything started, they were telling that it will take 2-3 days for them to take Kiev.
Yeah.
Now it's 15 months coming. They made a lot of strong words about other nations, by the way. They said Poland would be destroyed, United Kingdom would be destroyed, everybody will be destroyed. They are making a lot of statements, but in reality, they are losing the war. That is the reality. In reality, they can't protect even Kremlin. Saying that they are superpower, calling themselves superpower, They can't protect Kremlin. Just imagine that some drone would attack White House. I mean, never ever it happened, and probably it would not happen. But saying that they are so superpower, wow. But where is their superpower forces?
Yes,
they look ridiculous.
Yes, Ambassador Pinnack, I would agree with the Honorable MP of Ukraine that, when the war started, everybody predicted that perhaps Kyiv will fall in matter of 72 hours. Then it became 1 week, then 1 month, and now it's over 14 months and Kyiv stands.
And that is because it has received massive support from NATO and the USA. That is also a reason for that. Sometimes I wonder that one fine morning, President Putin wakes up with a headache and has a cup of coffee which he doesn't like and decides that he must attack Ukraine, which he did. I mean, nobody denies that he moved in first. But is there no background to that thing? Was something else happening in Ukraine and many other things geopolitically that was happening? So let us look at it in a long-term sequence as to what happened. Why did the attack took place without justifying the fact that he has attacked? Now, the other thing is that, we are hearing that it will now escalate. Now, as I said in my opening remarks, that a revenge attack is possible. And I think since it was the Kremlin, which is the heart of the Russian state, so to speak. But one thing I must say that I don't regard this as an assassination attempt, because these drones could not have perhaps penetrated too much into the thick walls of the Kremlin. And I don't think they would know where exactly President Putin was at that time. But the Russians are saying that it was an assassination attempt because it was aimed at the Kremlin. So these are claims, counterclaims. Yes. You just mentioned somebody who tweeted about something that it was Ukraine. A very, very, very intriguing thought also is there. That was it a third-party drone? I do not know, yes. But I'm just speculating. Okay. Once the drones are, picked up and investigated, then the origin of the drone will be known, and we know who owns what kind of drones. Then we will know who has sent it. But then in this fog of war, as Unni said, that, people buy drones from anywhere, from the black market, so everybody has all kinds of drones.
And when was this, the alleged drone attack? We also don't know about that date. Whether it happened 24 hours back or much before that, we really do not know about that either. Alexei, if Ukraine hasn't done it, and that's the indication that is coming in, then why is Russia continuing to say that it reserves the right to retaliate? Will there be an attempt by Ukraine to repeatedly say that they didn't do it, and if anything, they would be at the receiving end by an aggressor in Russia?
I don't know why Russia is doing it. I don't know why Russia started the war on the first place. Why should I react and comment all their words? Speaking about killing of somebody, Russia tried 3 times to kill me, just me. I'm a member of the parliament. They tried 3 times to kill me. So Russia is killing all the time. They're attacking in other countries. They're doing it all the time. And Putin definitely deserves death. It's no questions about this. So to comment all their statements, why they're telling this or why they're telling that, it's also possible that it was an attempt of coup d'etat in Russia. Part of Russian elites are very tired of Putin and his crazy deeds. Maybe they try to get rid of him, like it happened with Hitler in 1944. But definitely Russia will never say that, yes, it's our internal story. They will say, oh, this is NATO. Oh, this is you bad Ukraine. One more thing to your guest. He said, oh, Kyiv stands because of support of NATO. No one NATO soldier is fighting in Ukraine. And the most important in all wars are people, are courage of people. We are fighting ourselves. There are no other boots on the ground except of Ukrainians. Yes, we are receiving weaponry, which is very important. But weaponry is weaponry. The most important are people, and we are fighting with our people. I'm sorry, I can't continue to be live.
All right, Alexei,
Thank you very much.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you so much for your time. Nandan Unnikrishnan and Ambassador Chakravarti, please continue to stay with us. We are slipping into a short break. After that, we'll be getting a CNN special report from Ground Zero in Kyiv.
it's too early to give you all the details on the story and the statements and all that, but it's very clear that as far as fighting a war.
So, the big issue here is, of course, that some sort of an attack has taken place because there is a visual to suggest that. Exactly who is behind that attack will have to be established more, and what was the intention of that attack also will have to be established. But Yuvraj, if you can still hear me, the allegation coming in from the Kremlin is that this was a bid to assassinate President Putin. I think we've lost him. But that's going to be, Ben, is that going to be something difficult to prove and establish? That this was a bid to kill Putin?
In most general terms, they flew a drone, someone flew a drone against the Kremlin, and that's where Putin works. He sits in that historic building on the river. And in that sense, yes, it is an assassination attempt. As to whether it was going to be effective, like I said, I think it's almost impossible to target Putin personally and actually effectively kill him. So in the general sense, yes, it was an attack on the Kremlin. It was an assassination attempt, but with very little chance of actually working. And I think that's what we've seen. I mean, like I said before, I think the real value of this and the point of doing this is for the PR value in this war, which is Ukraine is desperately trying to keep the story in the headlines because it needs the West's aid. It's afraid of fatigue, that people get tired of this. And you have this spectacular picture of smoke rising over the Kremlin with a hole in the wall because it got hit with the drone is going to be a top story. I mean, it is a top story. Here we are doing it. And that is very important for continuing the war, continuing supplies to Kiev, for keeping the support on their side. And the Russians are going to react because here's a hit to the heart of Russia. And that's very uncomfortable for them because life in Moscow itself, talking to our correspondents there, is actually extremely normal. Everyone's going about their business, shopping, going to bars are full, the nightclubs are full. And to actually bring the war to Russia's heartland is going to have a psychological shock for the Russians themselves. And that could potentially cause Putin problems because he's managed to shield his own people, the bulk of the population, from the war. And they haven't participated. There's no sense of war in Moscow.
And Ben, interestingly, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think from the Ukrainian voices that we've managed to get so far, they're very clear about this, that, they are fighting a war against Russia. And absolutely everything is on the table. And they are going to try and mount more of these attacks into the heart of Russia because that's how they feel that they need to defend their country. It's not just going to be in Ukraine. They want to bring the war to Russia. You see more of this happening in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're anticipating a spring counteroffensive from the Ukrainian side. And there was someone in the State Department was saying, this is the most effective way of doing negotiations, is to do it from a position of strength where the Kremlin's on its back foot. And at the moment, the Kremlin is not on its back foot. I mean, the war is ground down to a war of attrition where they're just shelling each other. But with some spectacular successes, some pressure on the Kremlin, then it seems to me anyway that there's a growing desire to see an end and negotiated solution. But the strategy very clearly is to hit Russia with a hammer blow in this counteroffensive. I mean, NATO Stoltenberg was saying that 98% of the weapons that are promised are now in Ukraine, including 230 tanks. And I've only seen concrete reports for about 30 tanks. So it could well be that they've been sneaking in a lot of extra arms and ammunition material, tanks, what have you, and that we're anticipating a big attack. And that seems very clearly to include hitting Russia on Russian soil.
Russia.
And of course, this has sent warning signals across the world. We are going straight to London, where Elizabeth Braw is joining us live. Elizabeth, how is UK viewing this development?
Well, it's really extraordinary news. Now we should remember that it's in the Russia-Ukraine war. When Russia, in this case, says something, we should await confirmation, and that's, I think, what we're all waiting for now. This is clearly breaking news, and we don't have anything other than the Russian side at the moment.
Yes, that's right. We don't have, because, we are going with the statement that has been, released by Russia, because it says there was an attempt at, on the life of the president of the Russian Federation. But will there be attempt or an effort by US and UK to independently verify this?
That will, for sure. We should remember that that's what we have diplomats for in countries, and on top of that, we have intelligence services. Every country does, and the UK and the US have very good intelligence services. But we should also remember that in this war, Russia hasn't exactly been a paragon of truth. Russia has released a number of statements that then turned out to be inaccurate. So we would do well to wait for verification, first to hear Ukraine's response to these allegations, and then to hear whatever information Western governments and indeed other governments manage to find about this. Because at the moment, it's a statement put out by Russia, and Russia has put out inflammatory statements before in this war.
Yes, but even if we were to see this as, yes, the Russians have not painted the right picture of the war, so would be the case with the Ukrainians. But now Russia is saying that it reserves the right to retaliate. So this war, if anything, 400 days and counting, it's only likely to escalate. That will be certainly a huge concern for the world at large.
This is indeed the risk. So whatever Ukraine says, whatever third parties say, Western governments, other governments, including the government of India, perhaps, whatever those governments say, Russia has now essentially escalated the situation by saying there has been an attack on Putin, and it follows that then Russia reserves the right for itself to retaliate, and that really is an extremely dangerous situation, because Russia won't listen to anybody who says, well, it wasn't this information that you're putting out is inaccurate. Russia has put out information that it believes is accurate or has just made up. Anyway, whatever the case, the information is out there, and Russia is going to retaliate, and this is a very serious situation. And that's where one would hope that governments that have somewhat friendly relations with Russia would be able to intervene, because it's in nobody's interest that this war escalate further.
But Elizabeth, the Kremlin is actually linking this to May 9th. I've been reading reports which suggest that the Kremlin is saying that the May 9th Victory Day parade would go ahead in Moscow despite the incident. And this is the state-run TASS news agency which is reporting that. And, Victory Day is certainly very key for Putin, who often evokes the spirit of, sacrifice and his commitment to Russia. So his presence becomes important, and an alleged assassination attempt by Ukraine. Alleged, I'm saying, because these are, of course, it's the fog of war, as we say. This is an indication, and now the news is coming in, of the jets being on standby.
It is such a dangerous situation. And as you say, the victory parade on the 9th of May is, by tradition, a very high-profile event in Russia, where the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II is celebrated, and the Red Army and Soviet citizens made great sacrifices during World War II to help defeat Nazi Germany. But in recent years, Putin has been capitalizing on this World War II victory commemoration to raise his own standing. And we should remember that at last year's victory parade, he didn't exactly have very much to celebrate in terms of victory over Ukraine. So it stands to reason that this year he will want to show a bit more of a more success
Elizabeth,
against
just
Ukraine.
hold on to your thoughts. We are going straight to Eastern Ukraine, where CNN's Nick Robertson is joining me live. Nick, thank you so much. Is Putin preparing now for an all-out offensive?
It isn't clear. It seems unlikely. There have been a couple of attacks this week, and we don't know who's perpetrated the attacks, but attacks inside Russia, just over the border, targeting supply lines. Twice on a train route, a supply line route inside Russia that supplies Russian troops inside Ukraine, hit 2 times this week. In one instance, 20 carriages were destroyed. And just this morning, a huge fuel store depot at a southern Russian military facility, not far again from the border with Ukraine, was hit. So there's been an up-tempo of actions inside of Russia. We don't have any information at all that confirms or corroborates what the Kremlin is claiming about these drones that were intercepted over the Kremlin. Ukraine is saying that it's not them, that this is trickery from Russia, that Russia is trying to sort of build up support for the May Day victory parades that you were just talking about there. I think at the moment, the best interpretation on this is a potential for what Russia has done before, for a false flag operation, for something to happen, for Russia to claim it was Ukraine, and then have some kind of military action off the back of that. But an all-out offensive by Russia really doesn't seem very likely at this stage. It is Ukraine that is postured and prepared for a potential offensive, even in the areas where Russia is pushing, and it is on the offensive, like Bakhmut, for example. They take only meters a day, and that's only in the areas where they put a huge amount of effort in. So it doesn't appear as if Russia is ready to respond with some kind of military offensive ground action. It is Ukraine, on the other hand, that seems better prepared for that at the moment.
Nick, the war has been on for 400 days. What are the challenges faced by the Putin war machine, both in Ukraine and in Moscow?
We don't get accurate information from the Kremlin. We do get insights from the infighting that's happening within the Kremlin and with its proxies. Yevgeny Prigozhin of the Wagner mercenary group has complained multiple times that his troops in Bakhmut are not getting the ammunition they require, not getting the artillery support and fire that they need, not the ammunition for their weapons in the fight. Russia's problem is not just that it has lost a lot of military hardware, tanks, armored personnel carriers. It lost a lot in the beginning of the war, and it's consuming a lot at the front lines, throwing untrained men in with equipment, and it's losing a lot of men. According to the Pentagon, Russia has lost 20,000 troops and had 100,000 injured so far this year. Ukrainian forces say that Russia uses waves of recruits straight out of jail or straight off the street with very little training. So Ukrainians and NATO say that Russia's losses of men and materiel are high. So those are some of the constraints put on the Kremlin, that their ability to supply isn't where they want it to be. We heard from Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, just over the past couple of days, saying that if there are shortages, then commanders need to flag those shortages early. We know that Russia has put up production in its ammunition factories, in some cases to 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day. President Putin, over the past couple of months, has toured some of those factories. So we know that their military capability to produce enough ammunition is struggling by their actions and by the words of some of their commanders, and by the words of Ukraine, that Russia is losing a lot of troops.
My last question to you, Nick. Given Western military aid for Ukraine, are Ukrainian forces capable of launching such a strike on Kremlin, if we are to believe the Russians?
It's not clear. Ukraine says it didn't launch this. It wasn't responsible. Ukraine says that it will fight with all the means it has on its own territory. All the incidents that I've talked about that have happened over the borders this week and in the past few weeks, Ukraine hasn't claimed them. It indicates that it thinks it might be partisans inside Russia, anti-Putin, anti-Kremlin elements inside Russia. That's not clear. But I think the idea that that there might be a larger uprising inside Russia seems hugely unlikely. The idea that Ukraine has everything that it needs to launch a hugely successful counteroffensive. I don't think there's any military strategist on the side in Ukraine that thinks that's possible, that they know that there are over 300,000 Russian troops inside Ukrainian territory. That's triple the number there were at the beginning of the invasion. They know that the odds against them, that Russia has a lot of people in the way and in the positions and very well dug in exactly the places where Ukraine wants to advance. I don't think the Ukrainians think that this is going to be easy. What they think is it's a fight. It's their country. They're prepared for the fight. They'll take it on with what they have. And there's a lot of men that know, frankly, that they may have to sacrifice their lives to achieve it. And this, they think, on the Ukrainian side, is an advantage they have over the Russians, because they tell us that they don't think the Russians have that level of morale. In fact, I talked to a soldier just today who said he came across Russian forces in the front line recently, and the indications they had there were that the Russians were not up for the fight in the same way that he and his troops were.
Nick Robertson, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and stay safe there. You're slipping into a short break. Up next, in the wake of this stunning charge from Russia, we get you a special report from Ground Zero in Kyiv. Stay tuned.
And again, there was no comment from Bankova, so they tend to be very quiet about this. And I don't think we'll see any kind of comment or confirmation coming from the Kremlin side. There is a possibility that it's partisan action, that the drones, as I say, I mean, Ukraine border is a long way away at the edge of what drones can fly. So it's possible that these drones were smuggled into Russia and launched closer to Moscow.
Okay.
That could have been a special ops operation by the Ukrainians, or it could have been, you know, there's a small group of Russians who are fighting against the Kremlin who have been carrying out small acts of terror and blowing up city government buildings and police stations in Russia. So I think it's going to remain unclear. But as for assassination attempt, I mean, the Kremlin territory is huge and it's never clear where Putin is, and he tends to be inside. The chances of killing Putin with a drone attack on the Kremlin building is very, very low. And the Russians have already said that he wasn't actually in the Kremlin at the time.
Right.
He spends a lot of time at his residence. But the PR victory from this is enormous for the Ukrainians. I mean, to strike to the heart of
Absolutely,
Russia, to Moscow,
absolutely.
to hit the Kremlin
Ben,
itself with a drone.
Can I just request you to just hold on to that thought? I'm going to come back to exactly that. What does this mean to the Ukrainian side's, the entire, you're saying the PR, but, you know, just their boost as far as their fight against Russia is concerned. But I also want to go across to Svetoslav Yuvrash, who's the Ukrainian MP, joining us. Yuvrash, do you have any more details of what the Ukrainian authorities are saying or what has transpired?
I mean, the reality is we're fighting a war against the Russians. In the first weeks of the full-scale invasion, they have done everything possible to destroy our leadership. And I mean, it's too early to give you all the details on the story and the statements and all that, but it's very clear that as far as fighting a war...
So, the big issue here is, of course, that some sort of an attack has taken place, because there is a visual to suggest that. Exactly who is behind that attack will have to be established more, and what was the intention of that attack also will have to be established. But Yuvrash, if you can still hear me, the allegation coming in from the Kremlin is that this was a bid to assassinate President Putin. I think we've lost him. But that's going to be, Ben, is that going to be something difficult to prove and establish? That this was a bid to kill Putin?
In most general terms, they flew a drone, someone flew a drone against the Kremlin, and that's where Putin works. He sits in that historic building on the river. And in that sense, yes, it is an assassination attempt. As to whether it was going to be effective, like I said, I think it's almost impossible to target Putin personally and actually effectively kill him. So in the general sense, yes, it was an attack on the Kremlin. It was an assassination attempt. but with very little chance of actually working. And I think that's what we've seen. I mean, like I said before, I think the real value of this and the point of doing this is for the PR value in this war, which is Ukraine is desperately trying to keep the story in the headlines because it needs the West's aid. It's afraid of fatigue, that people get tired of this. And you have this spectacular picture of smoke rising over the Kremlin with a hole in the wall because it got hit with a drone is going to be a top story. I mean, it is a top story. Here we are doing it. And that is very important for continuing the war, continuing supplies to Kiev, for keeping the support on their side. And the Russians are going to react because here's a hit to the heart of Russia. And that's very uncomfortable for them because life in Moscow itself, talking to our correspondents there, is actually extremely normal. Everyone's going about their business, shopping, going to bars are full, the nightclubs are full. And to actually bring the war to Russia's heartland, it's going to have a psychological shock for the Russians themselves. And that could potentially cause Putin problems because he's managed to shield his own people, the bulk of the population, from the war. And they haven't participated. There's no sense of war in Moscow.
And Ben,
and
interestingly, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think from the Ukrainian voices that we've managed to get so far, they're very clear about this, that, you know, they are fighting a war against Russia. And absolutely everything is on the table. And they are going to try and mount more of these attacks into the heart of Russia because that's how they feel that they need to defend their country. It's not just going to be in Ukraine. They want to bring the war to Russia. You see more of this happening in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're anticipating a spring counteroffensive from the Ukrainian side. And there was someone in the State Department was saying, you know, this is the most effective way of doing negotiations, is to do it from a position of strength where the Kremlin's on its back foot. And at the moment, the Kremlin is not on its back foot. I mean, the war is ground down to a war of attrition where they're just shelling each other. But with some spectacular successes, some pressure on the Kremlin, then it seems to me anyway that there's a growing desire to see an end and negotiated solution. But the strategy very clearly is to hit Russia with a hammer blow in this counteroffensive. I mean, NATO Stoltenberg was saying that 98% of the weapons that are promised are now in Ukraine, including 230 tanks. And I've only seen concrete reports for about 30 tanks. So it could well be that they've been sneaking in a lot of extra arms and ammunition material, tanks, what have you, and that we're anticipating a big attack. And that seems very clearly to include hitting Russia on Russian soil.
Russia accusing Ukraine of attacking the Kremlin with drones overnight in what they are describing is a failed bid to kill President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin said that 2 drones have been used in this attack on Putin's residence in the Kremlin citadel, but have been disabled. These drones were disabled by electronic defenses. Russia, it says, has reserves.
Yeah, I think there are several things at play here. Number one is they've got a lot of men and material committed to the front. We know that the May Day parades in some towns in the country have been scaled back significantly or even effectively cancelled. I think it's very significant that Russia isn't using its aircraft, which normally perform a sort of a slow flyby over Moscow, over the center of Moscow, over the Kremlin during those May 9th celebrations. Remember, this is the other point that I think it's worth folding in and thinking about when we think about these May the 9th Victory Day celebrations. It's all about the tragic and huge loss of life. Tens of millions of Russians lost their lives fighting in the Second World War. So for Putin to have this parade and make it big and make the day big that is commemorating this massive loss of life during the Second World War at a time when he is essentially trying to hide the massive loss of life that is having in the war in Ukraine, that Russia still calls a special military operation, and the estimates, unverified estimates of
Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. And I'm coming to you live from Goa. We are at Fortune Benolim. That's a Fortune Resort in Benolim, just about half a kilometer from the Taj Exotica, ladies and gentlemen. That is the venue for the SCO Summit, the Council of Foreign Ministers. That gets underway on the 5th, but there is a lot of drama on the sidelines and in the build-up already. Because on the 4th of May, that is tomorrow, there are important one-on-ones between India and Russia. So the Indian Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and of course the Russian Foreign Minister Mr. Lavrov, and of course thereafter the conversation between the Indian and Chinese foreign ministers. That's happening after a long time, and that's also an important one. Frankly, we were quite surprised earlier in the day when we saw Dr. Jaishankar walking into Goa right behind us sometime around 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. That was quite a surprise, but he's here because India is on a mission. This is a very, very important meeting that is happening, and the significance of this only rises given what has happened at Kremlin and a possible escalation that we are staring at between Russia and Ukraine in that entire conflict overall. On the one hand, you have China trying to broker peace, but on the other hand, this is the biggest challenge now that there seems to be clear signs of escalation. Let's try and understand what happened. Now, if you see the footage very clearly, that's what the Russian establishment has actually released. The Russian establishment has claimed that around 3 a.m. late last night, there's a 2.5-hour difference between Moscow and Delhi. Delhi is 2.5 hours ahead, so we are at 8 p.m. right now. So you can guess it's about 5:30 p.m. there in Moscow. But at 3 a.m. Moscow time, that's what the Russian authorities say, there was a drone, not one but two drones that attempted to make their ingress into Kremlin, and they were shot down by the Kremlin's air defense systems that have been put in place, and that's captured on video. Russia now has called it as an act of assassination bid, an act of aggression which is a clear assassination bid by Kiev. Military forces have shot down two drones. There is no structural damage to Kremlin, and neither was President Vladimir Putin in the premises at that time. Putin was not in Kremlin during that attack. It is a premeditated terrorist act, is what Russia has said. Russia will take retaliatory measures at a time and place of its choosing. That's what they have said. Meanwhile, Ukraine has come out and said, we've got nothing to do with this attack on Kremlin. Even though Volodymyr Zelensky said that our counter-offensive measures are going to get underway, Ukraine is very clear that their entire plan is defensive. They do not see the rationale of going on the offensive and taking this fight, military fight, into Russian Federation, territory that belongs to the Russian Federation. Ukraine very clearly saying this is nothing but Russian propaganda, or Russia using this as a basis to increase the intensity of its attacks on Ukraine. Kiev will begin its counter-offensive soon, is what Ukraine is officially saying. Volodymyr Zelensky in Finland also saying the same. Meanwhile, the Russian parliamentary speaker is actually demanded, end this Kiev government, bring down Kiev, is the kind of now voices that are echoing within the Russian polity right now in Russian parliament. Russia is readying its air force, we're given to understand. Russian bombers are on standby. Air raid alerts sounded in Kiev, and Kiev, meanwhile, is preparing to defend itself and preparing for a counter. So clear escalation, but amidst all that, the big question, will the Russian foreign minister come to India? Abhishek Jha with me. Abhishek, good evening. So far, it's like we thought, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, when we came here, we thought, what are we going to do here? Because it's going to be quiet for at least a day and a half. We land at the airport, Dr. Jaishankar is there. We come to the hotel and we get to know that bombing has happened.
Bombing in the Kremlin, the center of the city.
Not bombing, the drone attack. Yeah,
drone attack, really. But it was kind of a sabotage operation, if you say from the Ukrainian side so far, because so far there has not been a clear position by the Ukrainian side whether they were directly involved in that. But we know the kind of the precedents in the past, the Crimea bridge attack, Ukrainian side has never taken the responsibility for that. The Moskova, the largest Russian fleet of naval assets, that was sunk in Black Sea. Ukrainian side did not take the direct responsibility for that initially. So these civilian assets of Russia have been attacked in the past also. While Russia has always blamed it on the Ukrainian side with the help of intelligence input from the Western allies of Ukraine, Ukrainian side has never taken a direct responsibility for these attacks.
Right. But in this case, right now, if the Russian foreign minister, clearly Russia knew of the attack much before it came to light across the world. When we landed, we knew that the Russian foreign minister was coming. We got confirmation. We broke it here on News 18 that the one-on-ones are happening, and that too, that's happening tomorrow. That's the 4th of May. So that means it was all in place. So somewhere, despite what had happened at the Kremlin, we knew, or the Russians had said, we're still coming.
So far, it has been reported that the schedule of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov remains as it was, and there is not going to be any difference in respect to the latest attack or the drone attempt on the life of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The scheduled meeting tomorrow, we are learning that as Jaishankar External Affairs Minister will be having a meeting, bilateral meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and Russian and the Chinese Foreign Minister also.
So Sergei Lavrov actually reaching very early, arriving early in the morning, and it's the morning first half is with the Russians and the latter half of the day is with the Chinese?
Yes, very much, pretty much on schedule, and it also because Russian Foreign Minister will have a chance to interact and have a bilateral with his Chinese counterpart, and he would not like to miss this opportunity at the time when China is increasingly getting into the role of a peace negotiator.
So there's a Russia-China bilateral also that's scheduled.
That is scheduled. That is very much on the card.
That is very much on the card. So it's not just India, Russia, India, China, but also nations who are part of the SCO using this as a platform to interact with each other on the sidelines.
Of course, and with this summit, that is foreign ministers meeting, a Russian foreign minister will have an opportunity to interact with not only India and China, who are the biggest allies in terms of economic cooperation and who are generating a lot of revenue buying Russian oil and Russian military assets in the last couple of months also. But also he will have a chance to connect with the Central Asian countries where Russia has been a dominant strategic and economic player in the past also, and Russia wants to remain in that role as well.
But somewhere does it also become a platform for Russia to actually put forth its point of view? Because largely the narrative has been crowded by what the West, NATO and Ukraine have actually tried to push in this Russia-Ukraine conflict. Russia is the aggressor first, but was its hand forced is a question. That's what Russia claims. And somewhere amidst, will it all be in the shadow of what happens in the next 24 to 36 hours? Abhishek, stay on with us, but I'm just going to quickly bring in Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar and also Andrew K. Leung with us at this time. We're hoping that Tatiana Kukreva, Russian journalist, is also with us. Tatiana is also through with us. So, namaste and thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to start with Tatiana. Tatiana, we are looking, I'm in Goa right now where the SCO summit is going to get underway, and the one-on-ones with India and Russia is going to happen in tomorrow. That's on the 4th of May. We are also standing by for Russia and China to have their one-on-ones on the sidelines of the SCO summit. Sergei Lavrov deciding to come despite what's happened in the wee hours of this morning at 3 a.m., the drone attack at Kremlin.
Of course he did, and that's, it's not a surprise. Although I might, we have to check the schedule. He boarded the plane actually before it was known that this attempted attack took place. But look, I mean, it's the same with the Russian president. The country and everybody has been informed that his schedule remains unchanged. He's working according to his schedule. This attempted attack was a stunt more than anything. And the Goa summit is an important meeting for Russia.
But who would pull off such a stunt, and will that now derail certain conversations that have been happening on the sidelines of this war that's drawn on for nearly about 14 months now?
Well, look, I hate to speculate, and I do believe we've discussed this times and times again, that, I'm one of those people that considers the official line actually, it's only professional for a journalist to, to yes, maybe sometimes question, but take it into account. And the official, the line that the services, the security services, the Kremlin put forward, that these were Ukrainian drones. In the meantime, it's funny that, for instance, if we were talking about any other country, you would not be questioning the position of the government. Would you?
Right. So that's where you stand, and yeah. But one aspect is that Moscow is nearly at least 700 kilometers, if not more, away from Kharkiv, which is actually the nearest city to the borders with Russia, Ukrainian borders with Russia. But clearly, has somebody sneaked these drones in? And are they really Ukrainian drones? The Russian authorities can show it because they've shot 2 of them down. If they have the mangled remains of those drones, and if there is anything to show that which ordnance factory this drone was made and where did it come from, I'm sure the Russian authorities will share that and will put it out in public domain. But we need to focus on what the impact of that conversation would be, or that development that has happened will be on the SCO here. Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar, do you believe that this will perhaps tilt the tone of the conversations and the focus of the conversations that are scheduled to be had? Because there are lots of nations which are looking at each other with a certain level of hostility who are part of the SCO. And there are others who are looking at them as allies or vassals.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anand. So, to the first question that you were discussing earlier with the journalist, I think Mr. Lavrov definitely will come and he will participate because, this is a grouping that is... there would be a whole lot of comfort level as far as Mr. Lavrov is concerned, which you cannot say, would be true for several of the other meetings, even, when Mr. Lavrov was here for the Raisina dialogue, etc. There were sort of, according to the Russian perspective, there would be sort of, some hostile or adversarial elements that were present. But here, as far as the SCO is concerned, it is a there's a huge deal of comfort level. He will come and the meetings will take place. I will not say that this will overshadow the discussions, but definitely, when we are talking about safety, security, peace and stability, then this would definitely be an issue, one of the issues that would be discussed. I think it would be the intention of both the hosts and also even Russia that the Ukraine conflict is not does not become the central focus of all their deliberations, because there are so many other important issues to be dealt with in terms of, of course, Mr. Lavrov could raise this issue when there is discussion on terrorism and so on and so forth. But I think it will be one of the elements in a broader discussion, deliberation. And at the bilateral level, of course, there are so many things that Dr. Jaishankar and Mr. Lavrov have to discuss. And also with his Chinese counterpart, I'm sure Mr. Lavrov, in all his meetings, he will try to demonstrate to the world that Russia is not isolated, as the West has been trying or West has been claiming. So I think there's a good opportunity, Anand, for Russia and for Mr. Lavrov to be present here and to say that, we have good functional relations, working relations with such a large number of countries and a body which, in terms of area and population, is the biggest in the world.
Right. Antony Blinken has told Washington Post live on the alleged attacks on the Kremlin overnight, and I'm quoting him now, "I have seen the reports. I can't in any way validate them. We simply don't know. Second, I would take anything coming out of the Kremlin with a very large shaker of salt." Tatiana, quick reaction on this before I bring in Andrew K.P. Leung and we get into the China conversation.
Well, look, that's a very expected reaction out of Mr. Blinken. That's exactly what I told you 5 minutes ago. That if, for instance, it were, I don't know, say, if there's a Chinese balloon floating atop American cities, nobody questions the American line. If Russia drones, that then the is that we've seen all along.
Well, you have a point there. So you're supposed to trust when America says something, but don't trust what Kremlin says or what Moscow says. and this kind of fight over propaganda and narrative and who's right and who's wrong, time and again, we tie ourselves in binds, and then decades later there are some conversations which say, oh, we were wrong at that time, there was nothing like that. It happened with the WMD conversation with Iraq, and America's position over a decade and a half changed drastically. But let's come back to what is happening here. What is China's point of view here? Where does China now, which was trying to play peacemaker, Andrew, and trying to actually come up as perhaps the voice of peace globally and correct its image, and also there were a lot of leaders of Europe who were trying to engage with China around the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We're given to understand President Xi Jinping also spoke with Volodymyr Zelensky. Now with these developments, what will be China's focus at the SCO, or will that also shift?
Well, China's position has been quite consistent. It's always on the side of peace rather than on the side of war. And even though China's relationship with Russia was very close, but this close relationship dates back before this Ukraine war, because the two economies are intertwined together. Now, as far as this SCO is concerned, it's unfortunate that this meeting is overshadowed by this unexpected kind of attack on the Kremlin, because the SCO now is entering into a different scenario where the whole world is changing. It's been reported that something like 20 other countries want to join the SCO. It's not just a fraud platform dominated by China. Why is that? I mean, countries like Turkey, Mexico, Indonesia, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt. I mean, all these countries from different continents want to join the SCO and the BRICS group.
Yes.
Why? Because the world is changing. The developing world is gaining influence. And most of the countries do not want to be dictated just by one hegemon, the United States. They want to seize their own development path. Even India's relationship with Russia is not dictated by the United States.
Right.
And so we're seeing a game changer there with the SCO. I think that China's focus is likely to be on the long term. As far as Ukraine is concerned, as I said, Zelensky actually took the initiative with this phone call to President Xi, suggesting that Zelensky, Ukraine itself, is getting exhausted. In fact, all parties are getting exhausted. Reports are coming in that even the NATO, the side of NATO, the side of the United States, is running out of ammunition. I mean, it's the 13 or 14 months already. And then, of course, as far as Ukraine is concerned, they're running out of bodies. They're dying by the thousands. And then the critical moment will come in this Bakhmut and this that part of Donbass. The idea that somehow the Ukraine is going to divide that part of Donbass into two parts so as to cut off Russia from Ukraine is really not really realistic. Even the United States have been saying that this
there is
by Ukraine is unlikely to change the picture. So I think that
Russia and Vladimir Putin, You brought a very interesting point up that the whole world is moving towards de-dollarization. Abhishek is still with me. Let me just quickly bring you in. That focus of trying to bring nations, like Andrew was mentioning, you heard Andrew, that there are other nations who want to join BRICS and SCO. There is a movement where nations realize they want to move out of the dollar hegemony or de-dollarization effort. But that cannot happen if nations are at war with each other. For that, India and China have to understand that there's got to be long-lasting peace. Their own strategic interests should not overlap each other. If there is a larger game which has to be played where you try and create a new world order or a new economic order.
And in that larger game, initially India used to be an observer, but now with the 1.4 billion population and a huge market size, India is a potential contributor where world is eyeing to have a large share of Indian investment, Indian trade and Indian market size. And that makes India at a very crucial juncture where world is eyeing for India's support in multiple, treaty, multiple groupings. Interestingly, Anand, USA was initially, when this whole SU thing was established in 2001, 2005 was the time when US was also trying to apply for the observer member of SCO. Since then, there has been a lot of geographical shift now, and now SCO is being seen as a counter of NATO or other Western US-led organizations with its trade, commerce, and strategic interests very much intact. Now, Iran has become part of SCO this year. Iran will officially be a member of SCO. Iran has now voiced an eagerness to become part of BRICS also just yesterday. So clearly, the West-aligned organizations or multiple corporations are being countered by many organizations like SCO and BRICS, where Russia, China, and other Eurasian countries have a lot of interest and stakes as well.
Right. Yes. Now, the Ukrainian Postal Service, Ukrposhta, has announced the launch of a new stamp after the night attack on the Kremlin. So there is more to this propaganda war, and there are others. So is this under all this whole veil of plausible deniability? Were there entities backed, sponsored, who entered Russian territory and then set off this drone? We don't know. It's all up in the air. But the larger strategic concern here is nations of the SCO, can they work with each other beyond trade? Can they work with each other as friends? Will China look at India as an adversary? Will it just delay its expansionist action against India till the time it once again claims a certain hegemony? So if you want to fight one hegemony, should you back another hegemonistic intent nation? What is India's position here, Ambassador Ashok Sajanar? How does India walk this tightrope?
Yeah, no, India has been a member of the SCO since 2017. India, I don't think we need to look at SCO only from the prism of China, although it is a China-driven organization. I think India has huge interest. The Central Asian countries, 4 of which are members of SCO, that is Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. The whole SCO revolves on the centrality of Central Asian countries. So as far as India is concerned, and now as you mentioned, Iran is also joining. So these are excellent opportunities for India to connect with the Central Asia, to connect with Iran and Russia and China also. But I think the focus has to be there, whether it is trade, whether it is commerce. There is also the regional anti-terrorist structure that is based in Tashkent.
Yes.
There our initiative of connectivity, in which we are developing the Chabahar port and taking it to Afghanistan, to Central Asia, and beyond that to Russia. I think the importance of the SCO, Anand, has further increased recently because of the international North-South transport corridor, because Russia cannot send its goods and products to Europe. And so this INSTC has become it's really become a lifeline for Russia, and all these issues, definitely, whether it is economy, it is security, it is political cooperation, they are all going to be discussed in the SCO forum. And India has a huge interest to collaborate and to share its own best practices with the participating countries. Anand.
Well, a lot of those names and members who you have mentioned, some of those critical heads are already here in Goa. Some of them are going to land. In fact, the Pak Foreign Minister, who we have not spoken about in this broadcast today, is actually coming from China as per media reports. So, and we are given to understand, sources tell us, that the Pakistanis present here right now as part of the SCO, as part of their National Council meets also, negotiators and heads of state also, they're all parroting only the China line. That's the source. We get you more details on our continuous coverage from Goa, here on the Right Stand and across the network on CNN News 18 and the News 18 network. But for the moment, we're going to take a short break. Tatiana, Andrew K. Leung, and also Ambassador Sajanar, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, it's poll-bound Karnataka, and I join Tejasvi Surya on the campaign trail. Do watch it.
To be in Ukraine, they want to bring the war to Russia. You see more of this happening in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're anticipating a spring counteroffensive from the Ukrainian side. And there was someone in the State Department who was saying, this is the most effective way of doing negotiations, is to do it from a position of strength where the Kremlin's on its back foot, And at the moment, the Kremlin is not on its back foot. I mean, the war is ground down to a war of attrition where they're just shelling each other. But with some spectacular successes, some pressure on the Kremlin, then it seems to me anyway that there's a growing desire to see an end and negotiated solution. But the strategy very clearly is to hit Russia with a hammer blow in this counteroffensive. I mean, NATO Stoltenberg was saying that 98% of the weapons that are promised are now in Ukraine, including 230 tanks. And I've only seen concrete reports for about 30 tanks. So it could well be that they've been sneaking in a lot of extra arms and ammunition material, tanks, what have you, and that we're anticipating a big attack. And that seems very clearly to include hitting Russia on Russian soil.
Russia accusing Ukraine of attacking the Kremlin with drones overnight in what they are describing is a failed bid to kill President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin said that 2 drones have been used in this attack on Putin's residence in the Kremlin citadel, but have been disabled. These drones were disabled by electronic defenses. Russia, it says, has reserves the right to retaliate, a comment that suggests that Moscow might be using this incident to justify possibly a further escalation to the 14-month-old war with Ukraine, or possibly a targeted strike of some kind. Ben Aris is a Russian journalist who continues to be with us. Let me just first try to understand from you, Ben, the kind of visuals that are coming out of this supposed drone attack. Has anything of this kind happened at the Kremlin ever before, this close to the Kremlin?
But this is not the first time Ukraine has flown drones into Russia. And I think it was maybe 2 months ago, there was actually a volley of 6 or 7 drones, and they got as far as Moscow. But they got shot down in the outside Moscow, in the countryside. They didn't actually make it to the city. They came down near an airfield. To actually strike within Moscow itself is a first, and of course it's very shocking. But like I say, the Russians have been anticipating this. They've already had some attacks, so the Ukrainians have shown that they can fly drones as far as Moscow. And they've been prepared. I mean, the Kremlin has defense guns mounted on the roofs. The Ministry of Defense, which is just up the road from the Kremlin, has been reports, and they've had guns, automatic guns, also on the roofs. And so in that sense, it's not so surprising. I mean, it's a shocking attack. But like the Kremlin said, it seems that they anticipated them coming in, and they got shot down in good time.
Can I try and understand from you, we are still waiting, of course, the Russian authorities giving us more details, but some of the Ukrainian voices are already wondering whether this is just propaganda and whether there was an actual attempt to kill President Putin or just some other kind of attack that they were planning. How do you see this episode escalating the conflict that is already continuing for more than 1 year?